items 2, 4, 7, 9, 10, and 11.
Approved.
And our proposed items to continue are items 3 and 8.
Go over the consent
Any
again.
objections? If
Could you go over the numbers again?
2, 4, 7, 9, 10, and 11 for consent, and 3 and 8 to continue.
A question on 4.
Sure.
There's a question on 2, and I just have a request on number 7. Just as the clerk had explained before it comes to committee, what was the delay in getting it? Because we're losing funds, being that this was not active July 1st. And it looks like the fire department did it way back in January. Fire Commission did it in February. CAO did a report in March. But we're not getting it until the latter part of July. So we can just explain that in the report, why we didn't get it before July 1st.
John White, City Clerk. Which item is that, Mr. Parks?
Number 7.
Okay.
And then I have a question on 2.
Number 2, the recommendation is to approve the CAO's recommendations. Number 4, the motion would be to receive and file the report.
I have a question on 2.
Okay. What's your question?
Okay. I could just ask the CAO to come up on number 2. Let me just ask you, on number 2, it appears that what the council did is an action in adding one station, number 7, and then these 4 that are on this report all seem to be on the northern and western part of the city. And I'm just wondering whether there are stations in the central or the southern part of the city that are competing for the same issues, such as overcrowding, no space, aged building.
Ramon Soto with the CAO's office. In regards to your question, the Administrative Oversight Committee in June asked the fire department to evaluate its needs for the replacement of fire stations should additional Prop F funds become available. And the fire department reported to the Administrative Oversight Committee both in June and July on this particular issue. And the fire department established a prioritized list of stations that could be replaced. That consists of Fire Station 39, which is the first priority, and also included on the list as a second priority would be Fire Station 11, which is actually in Westlake and not in the northern part. The third priority would be Fire Station 76, which would be in Cahuenga Pass, and the last one was Fire Station 37, which is in Westwood. The criteria that the fire department utilized in making its priority list was the age and condition of facilities, as well as factors that included response times, workload, and projected population growth, as well as land use and size of facilities. Regarding Fire Station 39, it is the oldest fire station in the city. It's 70 years old, has the most emergency incidents in the San Bernardino Valley. That is to say, has the busiest rescue engine and the busiest paramedic assessment light force truck as well. And it's just simply too small to accommodate its existing resources. Some of the apparatus has to be parked outside due to lack of space.
I understand that, but I think the issue is if it has all those dilemmas, why wasn't it in the first 20 that were repaired? And again, you didn't answer my question as to whether any central or south end stations have some of the same issues as far as overcrowding, size, and all that other.
Yeah, certainly there are needs in the city, and it was always projected that the fire bond program would be the first of probably 2 such issues. And yes, there are needs, but At this point, this would be the fire department's highest needs after doing a full review of facilities at all throughout the city. Would point out that as a part of the regular fire bond program for the 20 facilities that were originally authorized, there are quite a number which are, in the south. You have Fire Station 21, 64, 65. You have 36, 94. So there's a substantial amount of stations that are being built from, I guess, what we call the central city to the south.
Okay, let me just ask it another way. I can ask the fire department before this comes to council is to give us an overview of what are the remaining stations in South and Central Los Angeles and why they weren't considered in these remaining 4.
We do have fire department staff here. However, if you'd like a report on the issue.
Yeah, we'd have it before it comes to council.
I'm sorry, excuse me?
We'd have it before it comes to council.
Yes, this matter has also been referred to the ITGS committee, so perhaps the fire department could have a report on that in time for that committee date.
Very good. Maybe we'll see it then. Thank you.
Sure.
Number 4.
Before we do number 4, we have some folks to testify on 5 and 6 that have time-sensitive timing, so why don't we do those 2 items first?
Item 5 and 6, Board of Police Commissioners, CAO and CLA report relative to donation of a Hydra Minerva simulation system major incident simulation software valued at approximately $300,000 for use by the police department.
Good morning. June Gibson with the CLA. Items 5 and 6 are both interrelated. Item 5 we're recommending to be received and filed. That was an offer of a donation for a critical incident management training system from Lockheed Martin. That offer of a donation has been withdrawn, so for that reason we're recommending that the item be closed out. Item number 6 is a similar donation offer from the Police Foundation, which is valued at $370,000. We have included, as part of the CLA report, in the attachment, a listing of the equipment that will be offered by the Police Foundation. The donation will also include hardware and software as well as the related equipment. All of the equipment is off-the-shelf items, and therefore they conform to city standards. What is beneficial about the system is that the training exercises that can be developed can be provided to first responders, not only to the LAPD, but also the fire department and EMD. With me this morning are Chief Mike Downing, as well as Sergeant Tim Kalkis, who are very familiar with the system and how it would be implemented in the LAPD.
Any questions from members?
Let me just ask, could you remind us what the original purpose of that EOF fund was?
The manner in which the ordinance is worded is fairly broad. It basically talks about the ability to use the fund for emergency management purposes. The fund authorizes the general manager of EMD to expend funds with the approval of the chair of the Emergency Operations Board, and currently the chair is the chief of police.
So is that general fund money?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then, because I thought we used it for more in light of emergencies as opposed to construction and things like that.
There really is no limitation defined in the ordinance. We believe that it is appropriate to use the funds for the purpose as described. The reason is the location where the build-outs are going to be done is the Recruit Training Center. The Recruit Training Center does serve as the backup Emergency Operations Center, and because of the beneficial use that would be derived by the EOC, we thought that it was appropriate.
Okay. Let me ask you, was there ever a request made to the foundation to fund this?
Was there a specific request made? I think the police department can answer that one.
No, not, Councilman, not on the $68,000. It was, this has been going on for a couple of years because Lockheed Martin was the initial, going to be the initial organization that was going to make the donation, but because of some policy issues they had and management changes that they had, we went to the foundation to ask for the original. And then during the looking at the site, it was evident that we needed this money to do the wiring and the infrastructure to carry it. So the foundation was not asked for that amount. We had to, ask a lot of the donors for the 370. We didn't think it was appropriate to kick it up another 68,000.
Let me just ask, because that is general fund, and if we exhaust it, you'll be coming back and asking us for more. Is that if you could make a specific request and see whether they'd consider the 68,000?
Well, we told them about that. They offered 370,000, and we had to go to a specific donor within the foundation to get that, and that happened to be Target. And they knew about the 68,000. We told them what the total amount was, and they offered the 370. And even then, it was tough. It was tough to get.
Okay, so the Target gave you the 370. So these were not necessarily
It wasn't,
foundation funds?
No, they were foundation funds that were targeted for some unencumbered funds that they had given.
So not target organization, but targeted funds?
Well, they were targeted funds. It involved several companies within that the foundation uses as donors.
All right, thank you.
If I can, Councilman, Tim Kalkas completed a 6-month Fulbright scholarship to the United Kingdom, where he worked alongside the founder and developer of the Hydra Minerva system. And so this has been about a 2-year process in trying to bring a really kind of new paradigm shift to training in terms of reality, critical simulation training to the LAPD and other departments. When this does go in, we will be the first in the United States to have such a system, but we'll also be able to share scenarios and simulations with the UK, Canada, and Australia. It was first thought of to be used in the counterterrorism arena, but in looking at its application, it can be used in various means of unusual occurrence control, leadership, use of force, pursuits, fire department issues, EMD issues. It's really quite a unique system, and the expert is to my left here, can really tell you about it because he spent 6 months studying it.
Now, maybe you could take just a minute and tell us a little bit about the significant value of this system.
All right, sir. Essentially, the Hydra system fills a gap currently within the police department and potentially in other emergency management sections throughout the city to train command staff as well as lieutenants and sergeants level at a future date when we can break the scenarios down to that paradigm. And the ability of the system to, in real time, test people's critical incident management skill set and be able to, in a room where you have fire personnel, police personnel, emergency management planners, to have crosstalk and to improve a knowledge base about their different capabilities, and then address that to improve the responsiveness of those entities to the city is quite extraordinary. It's also, as the chief mentioned, it'll be the first system that's been developed that will be able to be used in the United States, and we anticipate a great amount of interest from not only the federal government but state and local agencies to come and see how we're conducting training and in participating in the training.
Any other questions or comments?
I just asked June to keep looking for another source. Thank you.
Are you voting no?
No, I'm voting yes. No, I think it's an outstanding system, but I think we know that EOF fund is very small. We know that it is something that gets eaten up pretty quickly, and we know it's general fund. And even though it's broadly defined, we also know that this is not a consistent use of it in the past. So if you can look and see if we can find another source, I think it saves us them having that money for how we've used it in the past.
Could I just offer one parting
Sure.
comment? June Gibson identified the ARTC as the backup EOC or the alternate EOC, the way that the Hydra Minerva suites are configured, you could take this whole system and turn it into an EOC, so that it will actually function real-time, communicatively with all the entities in the city during a major incident. So if something happened that was way beyond what we could handle downtown, or downtown was damaged in some way, we could have a real-time system up at the ARTC in hours.
So ideally, a motion would be to approve the CLA's recommendations and to encourage staff to find another source of funding for the additional $63,000.
If they can't, they can tell us in council.
Well, I think this is being referred to Budget and Finance as well
Yeah.
because of the transfer, and therefore, if between now and when the matter is presented to Budget and Finance, we'd be happy to report.
Just giving you a preview of the questions that are coming.
So I will take that as a motion by Councilmember Parks, a second by Councilmember Zine, and assume that is approved. Thank you. Thank you. And now we'll go back to Councilmember Zine's question on item number 4 before we approve the consent calendar.
Somebody here for number 4? And the Chancellor. I understand some officers were caught in the loop on this and are still waiting for their money, and they haven't received it. And if we're going to terminate the program, what happens to those officers that are in the loop that should be receiving it since they left and came back and were promised that compensation?
Right. Jim Chancellor, Commanding Officer, Personnel Group. There are 10 officers who left LAPD, came back on the department. However, they came back on before the sunset clause of July 1st, 2008. And the city attorney opined that it would be incorrect or improper or illegal to pay them because they came back prior to the sunset clause. Their probation had ended prior to that sunset clause. Therefore, those 10 could not be paid. I asked the city attorney to look at that. He did, and the city attorney I was working with was Pete Echeverra. And again, he said that it would be improper to pay them that money.
But if they came back prior to the sunset clause, they'd be eligible for it.
Yes, they came back.
Because the sunset clause means they wouldn't be eligible after, but you say they came back prior to the sunset clause, which stands to reason that they would receive the compensation versus coming back after the sunset clause.
Yeah, they came back before the sunset clause of July 1st, 2008.
Which would make them eligible.
But they came back so soon, they graduated prior to July 1st, 2008, and their probation ended prior to July 1st, 2008. And that's the key point. Their probation ended prior to the July 1st, 2008, and therefore did not qualify for the bonus.
But if their probation ended prior to the sunset clause,
Maybe the sunset clause would not be the correct word.
Sunset clause
It went into effect on July 1st, 2008. Each of these 10 employees came back prior to that, and their probation ended prior to July 1st, 2008. So it was from July 1st, 2008 and thereafter when employees were eligible for the bonus. That would be the correct way to say that. And their status all concluded prior to July 1st, 2008.
so what's the status of the $1 million fund now?
The money has, for the most part, has been spent. I don't know how much in the sense of what's left over, but I know right now we have spent $120,000.
Okay, you had $1 million fund.
Yep.
So what'd you do with the rest of the money?
I'm assuming it's just sitting there. I don't know. I don't have control of it. I don't know what that money is doing.
If we had a grant for this program for $1 million,
Okay, but that's for the lateral. I'm talking about the lateral. That's how much we spent for the lateral program. I don't know how much we have left in the $1 million fund for all the other bonuses for employees that came on, for workers who came on and got the $5,000. I thought you were just talking about the lateral
Well,
program.
On item number 4, relative to the effectiveness of the police department's lateral officer hiring signing bonus. So it was the lateral program signing bonus, and it broke down to different figures, but it started with $1 million from Mercury Insurance. And if we spend $120,000, what happened with the rest of the money? Or is there any money left that can be diverted to something else?
I don't know how much money's left, and the rest of the monies was paid for by personnel who came on the job that qualified for the $5,000 bonus. Because the lateral was for $10,000.
Right.
The personnel that came on that completed the academy training and probation got $5,000. So the bulk of the money went to that hiring aspect.
Does the CLA's office have anything to add to this?
Yes. To cut to the chase, there is no money left. That's why the program is terminated.
So the money, $1 million has been spent. And the 10 officers that are trying to figure out, since they believe they were eligible for this because of some sunset clause, have they been informed they're not going to receive it before they file a lawsuit? Which I would suspect would be the next thing.
What was notified to them, specifically one individual, was a letter that I drafted advising him that I would speak to the city attorney, and the city attorney has opined to date that there should not be a change in the ordinance.
Okay, well, I'm not going to quibble with the ordinance. My question is, if there's 10, and I met with one recently, who was with LAPD, he went to an Orange County department, he was there for a period of time, came back to LAPD, and he said he's been trying to get this money. And that's what opened my eyes to it, and then I see it here on the agenda this morning. If the 10 officers that are in question, have they all been notified that they're not going to receive it, they shouldn't be waiting for it, or are they still hanging in limbo?
I would say they're hanging in limbo.
Okay, so we have a responsibility to let them know, and maybe through the Protective League, whatever we need to do. But if there's a sunset clause and they came in or after the sunset clause, I can understand it. But if they were caught within that sunset clause, then we'd be obligated to pay those dollars because we made a promise to them when they came back. It was they go to other areas, they come back, you get a bonus of $5,000 or $10,000. And if we've gone through the money, I understand that part too. But what about our responsibility to these folks who are currently working LAPD, who came back with the good intention of receiving this compensation, and now they're sitting out there waiting for some comment, some word, some direction?
And that's an additional question. Even though they may have missed the technical deadline, did they come back thinking they were covered under this and with that incentive?
If I may offer a suggestion, I think it might be helpful to discuss this matter with the police department to find out who was hired under the impression that they would be receiving the signing bonus and provide more specificity as to the concerns that were raised by Councilmember Zine.
I think the commander said there were 10. No, there may be fewer or more, I don't know.
Well,
But
and
we don't
I
want to
think
lead people back and then disappoint them and welch on the deal. That's not the way we should do it. So why don't we hold this and have this come back to this committee? We can get the answers so we can let those 10 folks know what we can do, and also have Peter Chavria show up here so get clear direction of what we're going to do instead of leaving them out there in the cold.
How soon do you think you can come back with that information? Next week or the week after?
I would ask for 2 weeks.
Okay, well, we come back with this item 2 weeks from today.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
One or 8?
So,
Go to 8.
Right?
so,
Let's get rid of 8.
David? Number 8?
8.
well, that item was proposed to continue.
Number 8 is continued?
Yeah,
Okay.
number 8.
Very good. That leaves us,
Why don't we,
item 1 and number 12.
why don't we hear have a vote on the consent calendar, which I think now would be items 2, 7, 9, 10, and 11, and items proposed to continue are 3 and 8.
Got it.
What happened to 4?
4, we just forwarded to 2 weeks from today, continued it for 2 weeks.
I'll make a motion to approve that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded, so those will be deemed approved without objection.
And 4 is continued?
4 is continued for 2 weeks. And now we'll start with item number 1.
Item 1, motion LeBron Smith, directing the police department with the assistance of the city attorney and the CAO to report with recommendations relative to the continued use of police uniforms by retired police officers at motion picture, television production, and entertainment industry venues.
And do we have a city attorney present to address this issue as well?
Good morning, Carlos Delagara, Assistant City Attorney.
Good morning, Julie Raffish, City Attorney's Office.
Morning, Jim McDonald, Chief of Staff, LAPD.
Mr. McDonald, if you'd like to start.
I would, sir. Thank you. Just a clarification on the motion. In the second paragraph, it says to perform traffic control and crowd control at production locations as well as such important venues as the Hollywood Bowl, Greek Theater, and the Coliseum. Those three are not entities or locations that retired officers work. And then on the quote of Section 52.28, police uniforms limitation of, there are dots on top of that, but that's half of the ordinance. There is another half of it that precedes that, and I have that if anyone would like to see that. All right.
Can we have that? We have that, please, Chief. Can we
I have it
that?
there, yeah.
This is the preceding to 5220, or part of 5228.
It's the first part, the first paragraph of 52.28. I'm looking at the clock here, and my apologies, I'm going to have to hop out at 11 o'clock. We have a press conference on the arrest of the suspect who killed a 17-year-old girl over the weekend, so my apologies for that. If I could, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to come here before you today to hopefully be able to share some thoughts and perspectives and provide our understanding of some fairly serious legal issues that have been overlooked for many years here in Los Angeles. I'd like to attempt to clarify what has become an emotional issue. There has been a substantial amount of lobbying going on behind the scenes and a variety of misinformation with regard to retired motor officers working film set security while in full LAPD uniform. The department, in our position, has attempted to be fair to all parties involved. We have met repeatedly with the retired officer group, representatives from the filming industry, Film LA, and others. Los Angeles is the film and TV capital of the world, and we need to be able to facilitate their continued operations, and we have every intention of staying committed to doing that. A number of issues have been raised relative to what is simply a change in the uniform being worn by retired officers. Some say there have been no problems up to now, so why change? Apparently, those individuals are not aware of a number of issues of serious concern to department management and actually to all the men and women of the LAPD. We routinely get complaints about the appearance, behavior, and demeanor of some officers working at film locations. And some ask why all of a sudden. Well, it's not all of a sudden that we realized as an organization that this practice is problematic. In fact, far from it. Former police chiefs Ed Davis and Darrell Gates attempted to address the issue, but the political will did not support those efforts. In fact, I have meeting minutes here from the Police Commission dated May 12, 1977, that deal with the very same issues that we're dealing with here now. We have serious concerns about the manner in which retirees, or in some cases active duty personnel, are hired. Some of these concerns include risk management issues, unauthorized incentives, and a lack of openness and fairness as far as who gets to work those jobs while wearing this city's police department uniform. There are payments made by the officer to the coordinators just for getting the job. In business, that may be considered a finder's fee. In policing, it's considered a kickback. When our uniform is involved in behavior and practices such as this, it becomes a big deal to us. If the person hired in LAPD uniform is not performing the job to the satisfaction of the private employer, such as working around city permit restrictions, they won't be hired back. That's understandable on the part of the private employer, since they're in fact acting as the private employer's own police force. The issue of cost has been raised as a factor that would drive those looking to film in Los Angeles to move their operations elsewhere. As you know well, the film industry has been moving their film operations elsewhere for quite some time, and we haven't changed anything up to this point. When we look at costs, we find retired officers working an 8-hour minimum with an additional money being paid for the use of the motor, and in some cases as much of an hour travel time on each end of their shift as well. After 8 hours, they go time and a half, and after 12 hours to double time. Active LAPD officers working at film sites under the contract services plan would be compensated at time and a half to be in compliance with FLSA requirements and would be deployed as any community has come to expect of an LAPD officer, that is, to be properly trained, equipped, and accountable for their behavior and actions. Officers would be covered for IOD since they're working for the City of Los Angeles and not directly for a private employer. So the cost issue would depend on how long an officer is deployed, with the difference being relatively small at the end of 14 hours, which I understand is the average movie filming workday. Contract services section is not something that we created. Similar models are in use across the nation. Los Angeles is the only city that I am aware of where a police officer is allowed to wear the uniform of the police department after they no longer a member. In fact, no organization that I'm aware of, and the military is a glaring example, would allow the wearing of the uniform for the purpose of personal financial gain and operating in the interests of a private third-party employer. There are other issues that are of great concern to this organization as well. There are legal questions as to the appropriateness of this practice as delineated by 538D, subsection A of the California Penal Code, and a fairly recent legal opinion rendered by the California Attorney General. As the city code is currently written, retired officers have been permitted to wear the uniform as dictated by the Chief of Police. One other concern that I believe you would share is that of the 151 retired officers with permits to work film locations in uniform, 24 of them retired on medical disabilities. If they are medically unable to perform the duties of an LAPD officer and were compensated as a result with tax-free disability pension, then my assumption would be that wearing the uniform, driving a motor, and working 14-hour days doing traffic and crowd control would seem inconsistent with their acceptance of a medical disability pension. I was made aware of an individual who worked as an LAPD officer for 4 years, was given a medical disability pension, and has worked as a uniformed movie officer for the last 40 years. That just doesn't feel right to me, no matter how much we want to support any industry. We've come a long way together in the last 8 years, and we're viewed as a world-class police department, employing best practices in literally every aspect of the profession, having just spent much of the past decade under the federal oversight of Judge Gary Fease. His decision to terminate the consent decree is significant, and looking at how far the LAPD has come in employing best management practices in policing. The bottom line is that we're in a good place as an organization, and we continue to work hard and become even better. Moving retired officers to a different uniform where they remain with a professional, authoritative appearance but are not confused with active Los Angeles police officers is in the best interest of our organization and the City of Los Angeles. It also complies with the California Penal Code. The issue of needing to wear only this uniform and badge in order to obtain compliance from motorists and the public is amazing. Sheriffs and CHP officers don't wear blue. We have DOT officers directing traffic all over the city every day of the year. We use explorers to do crowd and traffic control without a problem. There are civilian flagmen directing and controlling the flow of traffic all over this country as well, all without the problems cited by some here. The requirement to wear a reflective vest is not something we came up with. It's federal law as of last November 24th. All of our active duty officers directing traffic as well as Caltrans, or for that matter anyone working in the roadway, will have to wear these vests. Retirees will still be able to work for the same employers, for the same pay, and under the same conditions. The only thing that changes for them is the uniform. The coordinators will still get to hire those retirees with whom they have a long-term relationship and with whose expertise they can rely on. None of that will change. The public deserves to expect that a person wearing the uniform of a Los Angeles police officer is working directly in the interest of the City of Los Angeles and for the residents of this city. We've tried very hard to work with the interests of the movie industry, movie coordinators, and retired officers, as well as current LAPD officers. We believe that by transitioning retirees into a slightly but discernibly different uniform, we accomplish the objectives of all parties involved. We have absolutely no interest in eliminating the ability of retired officers to work film locations. We appreciate their service to the city and will continue to work alongside them and support them on the streets of Los Angeles. We know that this action is not popular with this body or the retirees, but we believe that it's the right course of action for all the reasons that I've delineated here before you this morning. Thank you for your patience in hearing the LAPD's positions on this topic.
Thank you. Now, I have a question. Doesn't Section 5228 of the Municipal Code give retired officers the option of wearing the LAPD uniform when engaged in a permitted activity?
It does not give them the option to wear it. It gives them the ability to wear it at the direction of the Chief of Police.
Can I ask the City Attorney's Office the same question?
The ordinance as originally drafted only included the first paragraph, which was a prohibition against anyone wearing the uniform of a Los Angeles police officer. However, back in the late 70s and early 80s, when the practice of donning a Los Angeles Police Department uniform to engage in traffic and crowd control at film locations was brought to the attention of the chief of police, there was an effort to curtail that activity, and then 20 years worth of discussion on the issue. Back in the late 70s and early 80s, they determined that it might be better to regulate the activity instead of banning the activity altogether. And so 5228 was amended, I believe in the mid-80s, to afford an exception to the general prohibition against wearing an LAPD uniform. But the language of the ordinance that's before you includes the term may, which is a discretionary term. And the issue becomes who that discretion is vested with. And if you look back through the council files, the discretion as to the type of uniform, the type of equipment, and the manner in which this type of employment is to be engaged in is vested with the chief of police. And in draft rules and regulations that are part of the council file on this issue, those draft rules and regulations contemplate the chief determining which uniform will be worn, which equipment will be worn, what type of vehicle will be driven by these individuals engaged in this type of activity. So you have two things. You have discretionary verbiage in the ordinance itself, and then you have a council file that appears to strongly suggest that that discretion is properly with the chief of police. And so the ordinance needed to be amended, however, because the chief could not exercise his discretion in a way that would contravene or otherwise violate 5228 before it was amended, right? So an exception needed to be drafted in order to allow the chief the decision-making authority as to what type of uniform or outfit these individuals would be wearing when they engaged in this activity.
So I'm not entirely clear. Was that never drafted?
Was whatever drafted.
You said it needed to be drafted in, was it?
It was. That's what's before you right now. Originally drafted, 5228 only included the first paragraph, and it existed that way for many years. And so at the time, the discussions ensued about how to bring regulation to what was an unregulated practice. That amendment was made at the same time, I believe, as 80.03.1 was added to the municipal code, which is actually the mechanism by which the chief is given the authority to issue permits to engage in this activity, establish rules and regulations for this activity, and provide for a mechanism for review of actions taken, disciplinary actions taken.
Point of clarity, Madam Chair.
Sure.
The first paragraph you referred to, that language is not in the motion today. Is that the paragraph that was introduced?
I believe, I don't have the motion in front of me, but I believe that based on what Chief McDonald indicated, yes. This is 5228, this is the second paragraph.
That's why I'm a little confused here, because what's in front of us in the motion, and then the chief introduced other language that says that's the first paragraph. So I want to make sure we're consistent.
Would you like me to read the first paragraph?
Please.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay. No person other than a sworn police officer shall wear any shoulder emblem or any uniform of a pattern or design or in the semblance of the uniform adopted or hereafter adopted by the board for the use of the regular members of the police department, or wear upon any uniform any star, badge, or insignia of a pattern or design that may be mistaken for or confused with the official police officer's badge.
Then it goes on to read the paragraph that's in the motion.
Yes.
So Ms. Labange didn't really try to pull the wool over anybody's eyes by just stating the second part, because the second part is the relevant section.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
And when it says authorized by the chief of police, does it have to go to the police commission or any other review, or does the chief of police have the sole discretion to grant that authority?
Well, under the current ordinance scheme, the chief of police has the authority.
The sole authority,
As written, yes.
under 5228.
Let me check again.
That's the one you just read.
Yes. Yes, the chief of police has authority to issue the permit. That's what he's authorized to do. And that permit is to allow individuals who would not otherwise have authority to conduct traffic and crowd control to do so on our city streets.
So anyone who's given a permit by the chief of police can wear the uniform according to this paragraph.
Well, again, it goes back to may, meaning should the chief of police determine that that's the appropriate uniform, then their wearing of the uniform would not be in violation of the first paragraph.
But only in those sections defined, which is as a film, motion picture shooting.
That's correct. 80.03.1, I think it's 22.350, which is the film permit ordinance itself.
Any other questions at the moment? Otherwise, I'll call on speakers.
Well, because the chief is going to leave shortly, if we could have I have a few questions for the chief before you leave. And Chief, you know, I've stated before, I have absolute ultimate respect for you and Chief Bratton, although we've had some disagreements lately. This is not a personal issue, but some of the comments you made, I want to question. Okay. One is you at the beginning of your comment, you talked about there had been some complaints against some of these film retired officers. What has the department ever done about those complaints?
We investigate them. We get them like we would get any other complaint. We take it in the division where it occurred, investigates the complaints. They forward the complaint then, if we can identify it as a retired officer, to personnel, and they have the option then of sitting down with the person, potentially pulling the permit for them to work, but they're not within the department organization, so the usual complaint process or ability to sanction doesn't exist.
So have you ever suggested changes to that other than up to now? I mean, this has been going on for 30, 40, 50 years, and has the department ever said, okay, well, we've got some problems out there with people acting in our uniforms, we need to tighten this up?
Well, we've looked at it. In fact, I mentioned that we've tried to change it back to 1977 that I'm aware of by Chief Davis. Chief Gates as well mentioned to me that he had tried to change it. A number of things have been done over the years. I know when Chief Parks was chief, we'd send people out and look at the various venues, look at the people working those venues. But the reality is we don't have enough people to be able to do this on a full-time basis with the number of shoots around the city to go out and check on everybody and follow up.
Wait, time out. You just said you don't have enough people to check up on it, but you think we have enough people to run this program and put people on the streets and take the place of these guys that are doing it?
Apples and oranges, sir. Apples and oranges. We're talking about on-duty people to go out and look at what's going on in the streets at all these film sites. Contract services will be able to do that. Up to now, you're going to take a sergeant out of the field to go out and do that. But what we're talking about here, the people that you refer to that we don't have enough and chuckle about it, are off-duty officers, or what would be off-duty officers doing this. They'd be doing it at time and a half beyond their regular calendar day. So to laugh and say we don't have enough people, it's apples and oranges you're talking about.
Well, I don't think so, sir. I just saw LAPD deploy to UO twice in the last month.
Right.
Every single available person was brought in to work those virtually.
Right.
There were 42 film shoots going on the day of the Jackson concert. Could we put people in those 42 film shoots?
And again, the issue there is the film companies have the option to hire who they want. If they want to hire off-duty, we're not taking any of that away. They can continue to hire the very same people they've been hiring all along. What we're looking to do is give them the option down the road that if they want to hire active duty officers in the uniform, they can do that. That's their call. It'll be driven by the market and driven by relationships.
So it's driven by the marketplace, something I understand having been in business for many years. Right. If the available market dries up, what's the option of the industry? Either they use people not in uniform, which is what they want, or they go someplace else.
Yeah, well, the option will be, for the industry, it will be if they want a uniformed officer out there, they'll have the option to hire the retirees in the modified uniform, or they'll have the option to go through the city and hire active duty officers working extra hours, working what normally would be days off.
Okay, so this is an attempt by the department to put their people on the job rather than people that have been doing it for a long time.
Not at all. In fact,
that's what's going to happen. I mean, you're talking about marketplace, that's what's going to drive the marketplace.
I don't know why it would. If they've got relationships that we've been told all along with individuals who are retired who are doing this for years and years, The relationships, the expertise, and those issues, as I've heard over and over again, would the marketplace we would think would continue to go with the people the relationships are with, which would be the retired officers.
But part of the marketplace is the uniform they're wearing out there doing the job as well, which gives them the feeling of security that they're looking for.
Right, which is the whole issue we have, that if somebody on the street, a taxpaying citizen, walks up to somebody wearing this uniform, that somebody should be on the police department, not somebody who's no longer with the police department. And we feel strongly about that.
And I appreciate you feeling strong about that. And my problems is the council said in a meeting a couple months ago when two committees came together unanimously, we don't agree. And yet you go forward.
We're moving forward because it's the chief's decision to make the move forward in this one. We believe we're doing it for the right reasons.
Okay. And you did it in a way that the city council couldn't 245 it by not letting the commission even vote on it.
We did it in the way as prescribed, the way you do it. We reported to the police commission, and the police commission was made aware of what the chief's decision was.
Okay. One last thing. You mentioned properly trained. You want these people properly trained. Is LAPD not providing that training to its officers?
We're providing the training to our officers. We're not providing the training to retired officers, some of who've been gone 40 years or more.
No, so they didn't have the training you're talking about now, and you couldn't provide that to them if there had been an update and change in training?
Well, you were well aware, sir, of the number of changes in the department in the last 8 years relative to the consent decree alone. To try and keep people updated on that training for those who are active duty is a challenge for us on its face.
And how are we doing most of it now?
Are we doing what?
Most of the training.
For in-service for active people?
Yeah.
We're doing it as part of their day. You know, they go to train, they're assigned to training, taken out of the field, put into training for a day, and we do the training
But
requirement.
the training for the most part of the department is either doing through e-training, which anybody can do from any location,
Right.
or roll call training.
Or showing up at the academy or
Or-
one of the academy
right.
sites and going through a day of training if it's hands-on primarily.
Right, which is, the skills you lose. I understand that.
Yeah.
But you're saying we couldn't provide that to those folks if they wanted to keep that job and have them pay for that service?
I think that would be very challenging for many of the individuals we have out there. We have certainly no obligation to do that. We have people work in training that are maxed out, basically training the people we have with the current academy classes and all the in-service training demands. I don't think any outfit in the nation provides as much training to our people as we do. So the demands for just time to train is an issue. To train somebody who's no longer a member of the department would be an additional burden on top of that.
But your class size will be reduced this year because we didn't authorize the hiring of all the people you wanted to hire this year.
We're
So-
still hiring to attrition, thankfully, and we appreciate that very much. And the challenge there is we lose an average of about 500 people a year, so it'll still be fairly full classes.
Academy capacity is 800 a year, something like that?
780. Yeah.
So there is capacity.
Well, if you leave the number of people that are currently working in training, and you were to try and put people in, you've got a number of other issues I think you need to look at before you would make a request of that. Compensation piece,
Speaking
the
of-
insurance piece, and
All right, then, look, since you brought up the question of other things we need to consider, have you had a meeting, sir, with the LAPPL on this?
we're in the process now. Not on the movie job, not on the retired officers working movie jobs because they no longer represent the.
No, I'm talking about the in-service people that you're talking about will replace the people that are used to doing this job.
I wouldn't use the word replace, supplement, as they currently do. The only thing that changes here is the uniform.
Yeah.
Not who's working the jobs, how they're working the jobs, or any of that. It's what uniform will be worn by who.
I own a movie industry, I own a site, I own a company, I am a wrangler, whatever.
Right.
I got two options. I can hire a guy in uniform or a guy not in uniform. What am I going to do?
Oh, they'll both be in uniform. It'll be,
Yeah.
the uniform will,
One has the effect of the law, and the other has no effect on anything. Who am I going to hire?
well, that's your call. You want, and
Well, come on,
there's money
Jim.
issues. What we've heard over and over again is that
Who are you going to hire? Put your fanny in the seat of a guy that's running a studio. Who are you going to hire?
I
You're
think
going to hire
that
the guy
comes
in the
down-
uniform.
If what we're told all along is that it's based on expertise, experience, relationships, then I'd say that somebody who's running a movie studio is going to look very close at hiring the people that they have that relationship with.
Have they told you that?
It's not the uniform that stops somebody out there, it's command presence. And the people sitting behind me have command presence. Otherwise, why would people stop for explorers? Why would they stop for any number of people that are currently regulating traffic control around this city and around the nation?
I haven't seen very few explorers that have command presence. I've seen a lot of people wearing a uniform that have command presence.
Yeah, well, I think
That's
they do.
what brings
I think our
command
explorers
presence.
do a pretty good job for
You know
what they do out
something?
there.
With all due respect, if I didn't have my uniform on and I went out and told somebody to stop, they'd laugh at me.
I don't agree.
Well, thank you for that, I guess. I appreciate the compliment, but I disagree. And to that point, I'll end just saying that I've talked to the studio people, and they couldn't disagree with you more. They do not believe that if they have the choice between the two, they're going to hire the person wearing a white shirt and a pair of black pants and a vest. They're not going to do that.
If I could stick one question in, and then I'll go to Councilmember Zine. The fact is, it's pretty clear based on the feedback we've gotten that the film industry really greatly dislikes this idea, and they think this will exacerbate an already problematic condition of runaway production, which would result in lost revenue, which could come back and result in cuts across the board in the city, including the police department. Ultimately, this is a lose-lose at every level for the city. So why is this so important that we still move forward with it?
It's our belief that it's not a lose-lose. We believe that we're protecting the image of the department, that we've worked very hard to get where it is today. We believe that you'll have retired officers working in an authoritative uniform, still having the ability to do exactly what they've been doing all along, although I hear the argument on that. We don't see anything changing from the way it is now, potentially, for the uniform issue, and the industry will decide who they want to hire in any case. So there's no money issues if they're going to continue to hire the same people that they've been hiring all along. Anything that we argue about this, I think, is in addition to what the fact of the case is. And the fact is that these retired officers will be wearing a slightly different uniform. And that's the bottom line. I mean, I hear the laughter and the stuff about slightly different. It's a police uniform that would be, the white shirt would be different, the pants would be darker, they'd wear motor boots, they'd wear a motor helmet if they were on motor, they'll wear a vest. The vest is something that the on-duty people will be having to wear anyway if they're working in the roadway. That has been thrown out at us over and over again, and there's nothing I can do about that.
I just don't understand the real motivation. What's behind this? We have the potential to drive off the film industry, which is a huge problem in the city that we have to figure out a way to turn around. You're taking on a clear policy direction and interest from the council, which doesn't want to see this happen. Why this issue? Why is it so important that you take on the council and a clear policy direction and go in a completely different direction?
Well, the policy issue as far as the police department goes, we believe, is with the commission. We address this with the commission. The legislative body is the council. We understand that and respect the council's position on this. But the chief of police, under the law, has the authority to be able to regulate the wearing of the uniform by retired officers. And in an effort to try and do what we believe is the right thing to do, we're making that modification to the uniform. Anything beyond that is not happening. It's the uniform.
Now, would we have the city attorney, would we have the ability to change the ordinance in some way to take away that discretion from the chief or from the commission?
As the city's legislative body, the city council can certainly amend any municipal code.
Thank you. Mr. Zine, you had some questions.
Thank you. Just 4 items, Chief. Other departments in this region, what's their policy when a movie's going to shoot in their jurisdiction? We've got 58 cities, counties, et cetera. What's the...
To the best of my knowledge, across this region and around the nation, if you want to hire an off-duty officer to work a film location or any other location that's permitted by the city, you go through the city, you go through the department, and you hire the person working in uniform, but they're working for the city, hired through the city. They're not working anywhere that I'm aware of in the uniform of the city police department, but for a private employer, which is what's happening here.
Would they have off-duty retired in the same category? In other words, would they have their retired folks
Not to
come
my
back?
knowledge, sir. There's, I don't know that there are provisions for retirees to come back and wear the uniform of their organization anywhere else in America.
Okay. The other question regarding contract services, would that be a new division within the department?
It's a division, it would be a section, probably headed by a lieutenant. We have a group of people on loan there now to try and kick this off. It would be bodies that would be moved within the department. Our goal down the road would be to set up a system where active duty officers working in uniform would be compensated through the city. The employer would pay the city in turn then would set up a mechanism by which to put it into the personnel account, and the officers then would be paid in compliance with the Fair Labor Standards Act, and everything would flow that way.
How many folks would that section involve? Personnel?
Half a dozen or so. And those people would do inspections of the things that Councilman Smith brought up, inspections of individuals out there in the field, the ability to go around, the ability to schedule the employment, the ability to be able to call people in, to be able to monitor what's going on, the coordination of the whole effort.
So their whole focus would be on that retirement?
No.
Off-duty, not
Not
retirement?
retirement. That would be separate.
They
would also have the ability to go out and inspect the retirees working in the modified uniform, but the scheduling, the coordination, the payment, and those kind of things would be done through the city. Contract services would oversee that for film shoots as well as people work in venues off-duty in the department uniform. For those that work off-duty with a work permit, not in the department uniform, plain clothes or whatever, that wouldn't be affected at all by this.
But would that section then be able to monitor the retired personnel?
They would.
Whatever type of uniform they're wearing?
They would.
Okay. Two more questions. Medical disability, you mentioned 24 personnel. Are they currently working movie jobs on disability pensions?
They currently have, I don't know how much they work, or I don't know by specifically who they are, but I'm told that there are 24 people who have permits to work movie locations that are all on full medical disabilities.
That's a major concern.
It is.
When it comes to disability and work comp.
Right.
And the fraud, et cetera.
Right.
We're going to be through the personnel committee, we're going to follow up on that.
Great, thank you.
And one more time to the city attorney, what authority do we have with the current section that we're discussing? Under our current rules and regulations, what authority do we have to make any modification other than what the police department has already decided? Do we have any authority with this committee or with the city council under the current rules to modify what the department has directed to do?
Well, I think that under the current system, you would need to amend the municipal code sections that currently authorize the chief to issue the permits, establish rules and regulations, and decide which rules and regulations are important for this type of employment.
I'm saying under the current rules. There's nothing we can do under the current rules. If we want to do something, we need to change the municipal code in order to take that authority away from the chief of police. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I believe. I can certainly look through the ordinances that are subject to this discussion one more time, but I think that's what you have available.
Okay, thank you. Chief, I don't want to brush you, but it's 11:15.
I know, I appreciate that, sir.
Thank you. I'm done.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I always have a couple.
At least two.
Councilmember Parks.
Only
Let me go to 1A and B. Let me just ask, on going back to the contract unit, how is that proposed, and has it come forward for funding?
It is proposed to be anywhere, depending on the needs, anywhere from, I would say, 6 to probably 8 or 9 people who would work, and their focus would be to schedule, to inspect, and to coordinate the operation of officers who are wearing the department uniform in an off-duty capacity, or what we would consider today to be off-duty. They'll be actually on-duty working extra hours, basically going out there and checking on them and making sure that things are working and being the liaison to ensure that the permits are being applied uniformly across the city, the film permits, to work with Film LA, to be the departments or in the city to a degree, liaison with the film industry as well as community groups that call about permit issues, to be able to make it flow as smoothly as it can.
And so when we say contracts, they're actually going to be the ones that negotiate the contract?
No, sir. No, contract services, and maybe not the best name for it, but they would be more of a coordination entity that would regulate the inspection, the scheduling, the coordination, and the conduct of officers wearing the uniform, working extra duty for either film venues or for other venues that are approved by the police commission.
Okay. Who then would handle the process that when a company comes to the department and says they want to hire officers? Who would do that?
If somebody came and said they wanted to hire officers, it would go through contract services.
So they would do the hiring or notification?
Yeah, they would vet it to see if it's an appropriate location, as well as to be able to schedule it then. And
When do you intend to bring that over for funding?
as quickly as we can.
But you're going to set it up as an ad hoc unit until then?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then the issue of, let me just give a little background. I think if the timing is accurate, when Gates looked at this in the mid-'80s and reviewed it, I think the reason for that language was after he went through a great deal of review of it, came up with the language that viewed that it was less harmful, and I think the same issues we're dealing with today, less harmful for people that were getting off-duty jobs and a variety of things. That's why the language was created. I think later, once Film LA came into play, then I think the department took the approach of having more supervision go out to the locations and guidance to ensure people were complying. And so I think those are the two issues that were, I guess, fundamentally important to where we are today. The last thing I have is a question. When you mentioned the pension issue, and I got kind of confused because what I always understood about the pension is once the pension commission approves you and they do not call you back, you can pretty well do whatever your body allows you to do. And I think we even have officers that have gone to other police departments with IOD pensions. So, I mean, so it's just in the fact that they have a pension and they're working the off-duty movie jobs in and of itself is not an impropriety or something illegal.
It may not be illegal, and that's something we need to explore with the personnel department, but it just doesn't feel right for somebody who can't do the job of a police officer in uniform, get a full disability, and to be able to go out and use the same uniform, do fundamentally the same or similar jobs, and draw up the second level of pay for it.
But currently, with IOD, they can go do that any other jurisdiction. They can go to another state and do the identical job. In fact, they said, I'm almost positive we have people that are injured on duty, receive the pension, and go on and become a police officer somewhere else.
Yeah, I'd have to look up further. I wouldn't want to comment too much on that, other than if they've been pensioned off for the inability to do the job here. I believe that in the past, if the duties were such that it didn't affect the same body part or issue or ailment that they had, that they were pensioned off, then they could do it. If it did, then if it was reviewable, they could bring them back.
But once the pension committee or commission decides it's not reviewable, they're free and clear.
That I'd have to check, sir, with the city attorney. I'm not sure on that.
Do you have any knowledge of that?
I don't.
Okay. Because I think that would be important, because the way it sounded is though if you have a pension and you're doing this, you're doing something nefarious. And I think we have a long history of people being placed on pension, unreviewable, and they go and do almost anything they physically can do. Now, they may not be able to do it every day and all the other things, but they do get to continue their life with their pension, if I understand it. So if we can look into that, I appreciate it. That's my question.
Any other questions? If not, we have a number of speakers on this item.
Okay, thank you all very much.
Thank you. We'll call Brian Kinney first. What? Followed by Brent Hapworth.
I'm sorry?
Just have a seat there so we can hear you on the mic.
Thank you. My name is Brian Kinney. I represent Area 6 with the Glassdale Park Neighborhood Council. I'm also a member of Hollywood Teamsters, the local union for location managers. And I would just like to look at this issue in terms of resources. We have a viable resource of retired officers who can do this job. And as a member of Glassdale Park, we have some crime issues in the neighborhood that I'd like to feel secure knowing that my officers are rested, ready to go with the daily issues that they face. So with that said, I'd just like to show my support for the retired officers to do a job they've done for over 50 years without major incidents. Aside from that, I would also like to broach the issue of, I think in terms of cities, Los Angeles might be number 3rd in terms of all of the lawsuits that it has. So what about issues with active officers if we have lawsuits currently? With the not currently, but rather with the proposed new officers' rules, would that not drive up the costs of the lawsuits for the city if you had the active officers performing the duties that the retired officers do now without that same problem? So I just want to thank you all. I expected to go last to let some of the other retired officers discuss the minutia of why they should continue on. And with that said, I just wanted to add my support as a location manager and also as a member of Glassell Park Neighborhood Council that I definitely would like to see the retired officers stay on as they've been doing for over 50 years.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Maybe I'll have the next 4 folks sit up there to save a little time. Brett Papworth, Mike Fantasia, if I'm reading the name right, Gene Peterson, and Al Ruvalcaba.
Good morning. Brett Papworth. I'm a director on the board of the Motion Picture Officers Association, and I'd like to just address a couple of points that the chief made. I and others on the board have been in a number of meetings with Chief McDonald regarding this issue, and his comment that this change in uniform would be a slight change of a police uniform is somewhat disingenuous in the fact that he has made it clear that he wants us in a, if you want to call it a uniform, that makes us look nothing like law enforcement. Absolutely not. This is a 3rd generation uniform that he's presented, and this one is probably the least authoritative, and in personal comments to me, he's made it clear that this is the reason that they chose this. A simple white shirt and dark pants, no badge, no Sam Brown, no gun. Now, he will say that, well, certainly you can have your gun and Sam Brown, but if you go get a guard card and a firearms card, and you work under a guard company, we're not security guards. We are retired Los Angeles police officers conducting traffic control and crowd control at filming locations. Our primary duty is to provide a safe environment so that these companies can perform their work and maintain their ability to remain in the city and do their productions. Without that uniform, we would put ourselves and those companies at risk. I personally have had difficult times on occasion directing traffic in the police uniform because of the situation with road rage and so on out there. In that white shirt and dark pants, we literally would be putting ourselves and those production crews in danger. And I ask you to keep that in mind when making your decisions here.
Thank you. Councilmember Reyes, you had a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is more for the record, but a statement was made that access to these jobs and who gets selected and who has preferential treatment. How do you systemize, how do you make it transparent? How is it that those who want to have these jobs that are retired LAPD, that's actually being done in a fair manner in which there isn't a favorite or any kind of other types of discretion that takes away from the integrity of the uniform? How do you address that point?
I would, the suggestion has been made, and I agree with it, that there are a number of coordinators, that is, they're private permit services that facilitate the obtaining of permits, various logistical companies that have to come out and put up barricades and so on and so forth. And those companies have the lists of names of retired officers who are available to work movie locations. They make the phone calls. Now, it's been suggested that those coordinators, and from my understanding, they're willing to be brought in to the city under permit. And they will get a city permit to do what they do, to hire and send out the retired officers in uniform to work the locations. If there's any impropriety, if there's any problems where they are giving some preference to particular officers, or that a movie company is pressuring them to not hire that person back because they perceive that that retired officer was too hard on them, that wouldn't allow them to move outside their permit, then they would be vulnerable to losing their permit to do what they're doing. And I think that's a reasonable option.
And that's a system that has yet to be implemented. That's something we would have to contemplate and assess if we're going to have this policy discussion, this policy change.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you. Mike Fantasia?
Mike Fantasia.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well,
But nobody gets it right.
didn't sound like that would be the right name.
There's a couple of issues I'd like to discuss. First of all, the uniform is key to the officers doing their jobs on set. I'm a location manager. I've been a location manager for 19 years. I work on feature films, big feature films primarily. I'm not going to hire people that look like security guards. My security guards have a hard time doing their job. There's no way that the officers can do their jobs in a uniform that looks like a security guard. One thing that the chief didn't speak about, he talks about the uniforms, but he didn't talk about the motorcycles. Now, as I understand it, one of the things that the chief would like to do is have the officers on motorcycles that don't have flashing lights and don't have insignias. I'm working on a movie called The Green Hornet. We're going to have about 30 days, 30 nights of filming in Los Angeles with 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 15 policemen at a time. These officers working at night don't have flashing lights, don't have insignias, and are dressed like security guards, will never get the job done. It'll be dangerous. People will get injured. There's just no way the job can be done. As far as costs go, based on what the chief said at, I think the date was April 1st, the Public Works Committee meeting, I played around with his numbers a little bit. Councilman Reyes, I gave you a copy of the cost differential. It's a little bit different now. We've reduced our schedule a little bit, but the movie I'm working on now, our cost would go up between $125,000 and $155,000. And this is based on the chief's $68 an hour plus administrative fee plus $118 per permit. So it's a huge, huge number for my picture. We're here in L.A. By the narrowest of margins. We were almost in Boston or Atlanta for a couple of months this year, but the producers were able to keep it here in Los Angeles, probably saving 250 jobs in Los Angeles. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Gene Peterson?
My name's Gene Peterson. I'm on the board of directors for the MPOA. I gave you a packet with some letters from officers who would like to say things that aren't here, and also some additional information. I know we're here about the uniform, but really that's not the issue. The issue is they want to put contract services in and get rid of us. They're doing everything they can to try to do that, change the uniform. The top part there on the protective league, they've sent out notices to the department on the land system requesting officers to sign up for movie jobs, especially motorcycle officers. This is something that the league is concerned about because they haven't met and conferred about and the time, effort, and energy that the officers are going to be doing out there, how they're going to be compensated if there's any medical or problems like that. I also have a lawsuit that back in '89 where there were 3 officers from an outside jurisdiction wearing a different uniform, different patches and badge. As a result of that, they did a lawsuit to keep their job. The department had a brief that they sent back indicating why they thought that the LAPD uniform was appropriate for wearing. If I could, I'll read it to you. Public safety is better served if Los Angeles off-duty and retired officers perform this function. The residents of any community are more likely to respond positively to the directions of an individually readily recognized by his or her uniform as a local police officer or traffic officer, and the chances of misunderstanding, confusion, or error in judgment are significantly reduced. situations arise which require coordination between the officers and the film and traffic control on-duty officers because of some crime scene or emergency, they are able to work with the active duty officers because the proper tactics are employed, common training and policies relating to the use of force, pursuits, etc. Familiarity with equipment, its proper use are all factors which contribute to public safety.
You can finish reading what you wanted to read.
Okay. Contribute to public safety and bear a rational relationship to proper public purpose. In this day of tight government financing, permitting local Los Angeles police officers to engage in these activities will have the ancillary effect of increasing the police presence either in reality or perceptually, and this too contributes to the proper public purpose.
Again, who was that from?
This was the police department in their brief to try to stop the injunction to keep the outside jurisdiction officers from working film work because they had different patches and a badge, and they were saying that they had to be in the LAPD outfit in order to work and be safe.
Have you given us a copy of that, and if
Yes,
so?
there's 2 copies up there. I can also leave this one.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Al Ruvalcaba, and let me read the next 4 so you can be ready to come up. Next 4 will be Eric Nichols, Timothy Hillman, Eva Schroeder, and Brianna Burke.
Yes, again, I am Al Ruvalcaba, and I'm on the board of directors for the MPOA. When I was in the police department, they used to refer to me as sergeant, and when I was in the military, especially right before I reserved, they called me colonel. But lately, on the police department, the brass has referred to us, as far as retirees, as racist, knuckle-dragging Neanderthals. And that was about 2 months ago at the Lakers. Again, I can assure you, in the 31 years I was in the police department, I never had one complaint made against me for being a racist. And again, you can look at my size and the length of my arms. I'm not a knuckle-dragging Neanderthal. Contract services, as Chief McDonald had stated to Public Works, it says they'll eliminate the middleman, meaning the wranglers or the location coordinators, as we call them, who are subject to corruption, and he'll be able to make millions of dollars for the city of Los Angeles. Now, my understanding, as of 4 weeks ago, Lieutenant Garvin from Contract Services has contacted the coordinators, and now he wants them to coordinate the active off-duty officers to work for the movie set by giving them their phone numbers and whatnot. And again, this was published on the local area network of the department. And this, again, is in conflict with the meet and confer process that's taking place right now with the particularly concerning this subject matter. As you can tell, the uniform is a moving target. Next week, if we were to meet again, it'd be a different style. We don't know what. Again, they talk about the badge when they refer to the Attorney General's office. Again, we had conversations with them, and they indicated that that was meant for the political donors and not for the retirees of law enforcement. To have a plan that no one understands and is putting the city, number one business, at risk.
If you could wrap up.
Borders on insanity. We must put our egos to the side, take a deep breath, and do what is right for the city of Los Angeles. And that's keeping the retirees in police uniform. Thank you.
Thank you. Eric Nichols.
Thank you, Council. Eric Nichols, Pacific Production Services. I am one of the coordinators that you were speaking of, Councilman Reyes. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to address that too. Bottom line here, this is about retaining our core industry. And having this uniform is a big part of that. The important part, though, is that nobody's hit yet, is we're giving, as an incentive to this film industry, police officers at 50% the cost of any of the surrounding jurisdictions at no cost to the taxpayers. That's a big incentive that you're giving away. In these times, we're fighting to keep jobs and money here. You're doing this at no cost to yourselves. Very important. Also, by using wranglers like myself and others, we're able to act responsibly and quickly to demands of the industry. When film shoots get canceled or rescheduled at the last minute, I get calls at midnight. I need 4 guys in the morning. I take care of that. I don't think the department will be able to do that for the industry. Recently, somebody was just shooting in Boston, a place where our chief has recently been part of, And they had to lose a film day because they couldn't get enough police officers to shoot. That should be a real issue right there. We cannot shut down filming at all. And he doesn't have enough motor officers. There's 180 motorcycles that we know of in the department. Well, we put out 120 a day on a busy day. Is the city really going to give the film industry its only motorcycles? I don't think so. And yet you get them again at no cost to you on the streets. Very important. The department wants to talk about problems, yet it has yet to expose any of these problems to us as wranglers. Show us these problems. Help us work with them. I've gone personally to the Personnel Division and talked with Chancellor's people and asked for a sergeant to address issues that we knew existed years ago. The department has been totally hands-off on us. Now we come to them and they say, oh, we're just going to get rid of the whole thing. The system is not broken. We have a $30 billion industry here because of the work of these hard men and women, and we need to keep them there in uniform. And lastly, I would ask that when you consider this issue, if you are able to keep the officers in the uniform, that we create a new oversight committee that will address personnel issues so that the chief can't go on a witch hunt and try and individually attack each one of these officers. Thank you for your time, and we appreciate your efforts.
Thank you.
I have a question on this.
Councilmember Zine.
Regarding this issue and the status of the officers, have you ever discussed turning them into reserve officers? Has that ever been brought up to have them?
Not to my knowledge, sir.
If they were reserve officers, they'd follow the department guidelines, they'd work within the department guidelines. That's never been brought up as a possible solution?
There was talk of GSD being the new uniform, which I personally disagree with. I have not had anybody speak to me with regards to reserves.
LAPD reserves?
Correct. No, I have not had any conversations along those lines.
Okay.
Again, they have very much dictated to us, this is what's going to happen, not try to negotiate a good deal for both the city and the officers.
Well, I understand originally they wanted to eliminate the retired folks.
We were told they would be out of the uniform and not doing this job by a given, a month or two timeline.
And then there was a meeting in the city council chambers a few months ago when it was stated by Chief McDonald that they weren't going to get rid of them, they wanted to change the uniform.
Correct.
So I think from the initial stage where the concern was from the department to eliminate retired from working movie jobs and just have full-time on overtime to now changing the uniform and permit the retirees to continue working movie jobs.
Correct, but the distinction has to be made. If you're working in the streets late at night in a bad part of town, you're going to hire the real uniform, you're going to hire a wannabe uniform.
No, I'm not disputing that. I'm just talking about where it began.
Yes.
With
Clearly,
the original,
the chief had an agenda to eliminate these officers from this industry.
the retired folks.
Correct.
And to have active personnel.
Active duty, off duty, doing this
So
job.
what came about to make that modification?
I believe that it was the efforts of the MPOA and coordinators like myself trying to help the council understand the importance of this to our industry.
So then the department, the chief, relented on that and said, let's just change the uniform, and now it's gone through 3 revisions on the uniform change.
Correct.
But nowhere have they ever discussed about converting these folks into reserve officers,
Again, not to my knowledge.
which would then give the department the authority, the jurisdiction to have control over their conduct, demeanor.
Yeah.
Okay.
We are definitely open.
And uniform.
Yeah, we are definitely open to oversight. I'm actually the person that sort of created this idea of putting the Wranglers under a permit as well. And a third component of that hasn't been discussed would be if I'm under a work permit, the officer's under a work permit, now the film permit is enforced. Because if it's not being enforced, you're going to pick up the phone and call somebody like me and say, look, you want to keep your work permit, make sure your officers are enforcing those permits.
Obviously, they want to have some control over it, and how do we come to that resolution where they have control?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And we're willing to work with the city on that issue.
Excuse me, may I answer the councilman's question regarding reserves?
Certainly.
I was in discussions with Commander Kanzler, this was almost 2 years ago, as a member of the MPOA. That issue was brought up, and Commander Kanzler brushed it aside. When it was discussed at any length, the comment was, well, if we made you reserves, you would be the reserve force for active officers working movie locations, and then if we ran out of those, we would call you. And that was the plan there. In effect, it still eliminated this.
Well, there could be some solution by bringing them under that umbrella where the assignment could be mandated without the backfill, but to continue with this if there's a concern about the uniform and the jurisdiction and control and who mandates what. So it could be a solution to retaining the uniform and continuing the job since the department is backed off on
removing the retirees from movie jobs.
Our only concern there would be, because of the acrimony and the problems that we're running into here, we'd be concerned about a backlash. And
Well, you're going to get a backlash anywhere you go.
well, that's true.
I think you got to realize that by now.
Well, that's why I'm asking that you take into
Trying
account.
to resolve the backlash.
That you take into account some sort of committee that involves maybe some of these retired officers in a review process. Because we have seen 2 disciplinary actions that were a dog and pony show that the officers had not a chance to even defend themselves. And we can't stand for that, obviously, because they can take them out one at a time.
Okay. Thank you.
And Councilmember Zine, I think it'd certainly be differences of opinion over whether the department has actually backed off on trying to get rid of these guys, because from my point of view, they've decided rather than going through the front door to get rid of them, they'll go through the back door by making their uniforms ridiculous enough that people won't hire them. So I think that's still personally front and center on the agenda.
And that is the September 20th deadline that we're under right now. We are out of this uniform on September 20th, and that's vitally important. So let's keep that in mind, please.
But if you understand the way this has been coordinated, it's been coordinated without the police commission. It's been coordinated, as the city attorneys testified, without the jurisdiction that we have control over. Unless we change the municipal code, and to change the municipal code, it takes not days, weeks, it takes months.
That's exactly why this room full of people is here.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Council.
Next speaker is Timothy Hillman.
Yes. Thanks very much for having us here. I'm dressed a bit casually. I mean, no disrespect to the council. I'm actually one of the few location managers in this town that actually has a job. I'm working on CSI New York, and when I leave here, I'm going to Scout Alleys in downtown Los Angeles, and it's a tad warm out there, so that's my casual attire. There's approximately 250,000 employees of the entertainment industry in L.A. City and L.A. County. Right at the moment, 25,000 of them are out of work. That's because shows keep going out of town. There were 17 pilots that were done last pilot season out of state, and those pilots that got picked up are being done out of state. That's 250 people per show that don't have a job. What Chief Bratton is trying to do with this is a money grab. It has nothing to do with the uniform. There's an old saying in politics that if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck and it swims like a duck, it's a duck. Chief Bratton is a duck. He's trying to grab the money. I've seen Chief McDonald's presentation 4 separate times over the past year. The uniform has changed every time. His plan has changed every time. First, contract services was going to take care of hiring all the officers. Then the coordinators were going to take care of hiring the retired officers. Then contract services was going to take care of hiring all the. He keeps changing his story every time. As the councilman just said, he's gone behind the back of everyone to try and get this shoved through. And the only people it's going to hurt, I'm not talking about the executives that live in Bel Air that drive their Bentley to and from the studio. I'm talking about the working stiffs like me and the other people in this room that make their living, raise their families, and vote in the city of Los Angeles and the county of Los Angeles. We're the ones that are in jeopardy of losing our jobs. There'll be no consistency if the LAPD is allowed to take control of this, because they will change shifts. I'm sorry, they'll change shifts.
I'll have to ask you to wrap up.
They'll change shifts every 8 hours, which means production will shut down at $15,000 to $18,000 per hour for a half hour to change those shifts. So it's not just the difference of $49 an hour versus $80 an hour. A half hour at $18,000 an hour, that's a $9,000 hit right there. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Next speaker is Eva Schroeder, to be followed by Brianna Burke.
Hi. 2 things just to finish up on Tim and the lack of consistency. If the city takes over the movie jobs, you're going to get new officers every day. And you're going to have to explain, in Mike's case, being downtown, same location, same kind of car, work for multiple days, you're going to have to explain that every day, every shift change, and that, too, will take away the time. My real purpose for being here was that we put together a petition against eliminating the retired officers from the film unit duty and or the proposed uniform change for film unit duty officers, and we're up to 6,200 signatures. Last time we presented 4,400 signatures. So there's clearly a lot of support to keep the officers in their uniform, doing the jobs as they've been doing it for a long time. and I appreciate the support that you guys seem to be giving us, and we just have to figure out how to make it all work.
We see your book, please.
And this is also vendors who supply, the toilets and the food and the dry cleaners, and it's a trickle-down effect about who's affected by this business and the loss thereof.
Thank you. Next speaker is Brianna Burke. And then before you start, let me read the remaining 3 speakers and ask you to come up as well. Chris Bunting, if I'm reading the name right, Christy Frankenheimer, and Robert Mandel. Please.
Hi, my name is Brianna Burke. I'm a location manager. And my first statement, everyone needs to know that I've talked to all of my police officers. They're not going to wear this uniform. They're just not. I'm not going to have any choice. This last Friday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I got a phone call that our film from the previous evening, we'd worked all night, had been destroyed at the lab. And instead of a 6 a.m. call on Saturday, I had to push my call up to midnight. I could do this with our current system. And my producers are fully aware of the fact that the only reason we got this done is because of my retired officers. That's important. I work for a small producer. We spent $10 million here. For 4 days of filming in the city of Los Angeles, I spent $275,000 for those 4 days. 75 went to the locations, 20 went to the city for city services. The rest of it was spent with Los Angeles-based vendors and businesses. If this changes, this producer is not going to film here anymore. They will take this to Texas next time. They started their first one in Phoenix. They wanted to come home and be close. They are absolutely up in arms about this potential change. The system is not broken. I'm very concerned that one person has the authority to make this decision. This is supposed to be a democracy, not a dictatorship. The proposal is bad for the city of Los Angeles. It's bad for the film industries. It's bad for the retired officers. It's bad for the current officers who's going to retire and have a job when they're done. It is just bad. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you. And how do you really feel?
It's bad.
The next speaker is Chris Bunting.
Yes. I'm Chris Bunting. I'm a key assistant location manager in the city of Los Angeles still. Being that we are literally watching movie crews, television shows, and everything else leave the city of Los Angeles, the reason that I'm here today is this glorified Boy Scout uniform that they want to put our retired officers in. There's 2 things that I would like to present, is the fact that I have watched security guards who are directing traffic in a base camp parking lot that is not on the street get blown past by background artists and hair and makeup people that are on the phone. So if we put our officers on our city streets in these glorified uniforms, I'm not going to stop for them as a regular citizen. And which is anyway. So the other thing is that with that is a really big public concern. And the other thing that they keep presenting to us is, there's all of these reported problems. I've never been on a set where there's been any problems with a retired officer, nor can they produce any documentation in regards to that. They have no videotape. They have no anything that this person has complained, that person's complained. So how can we fix the problem instead of just getting a blanket statement of it's just a broken system? If they can't even produce that kind of documentation, can they really take over those jobs on a movie shoot where, like Brianna had said, we get call times changed, an hour before we shoot, a day before we shoot? If they can't produce documentation of all these problems that we're having, can they really get to a call time that gets pushed 3 hours ahead? That's my 2 concerns. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Christy Frankenheimer.
Hi. Oops, I still have 14 seconds. I also apologize for the informality. I broke my toe, and it's really hard to wear a suit with flip-flops, so it's no disrespect intended.
Don't worry about it.
Thanks. I've been a working location manager for over 23 years in Los Angeles mainly. I am unemployed and have been for the past 6 months, which is the longest I have ever gone voluntarily without a job. And it is not solely, obviously, because of this, but there are so many states that are offering incentives And for us right now to take away one of the few filming incentives that we do have in the city of Los Angeles is, I think, I don't even understand how it can happen. I feel like I'm in the movie Groundhog Day because I keep coming to these meetings and we keep thinking that this is going to be taken care of. And we know that most of you get this, all of you here get this. Why is it that one man, as Brianna says, has the power to take away my house, basically, to take away my income and my ability to work? Because if his impetus is the branding of the LAPD uniform, why are we fighting so hard to keep our gentlemen in uniform? We all respect this uniform. It makes us obey the law. I have the utmost respect for the LAPD in general. I think they're doing a fabulous job on the streets. That's where they should stay. We are fighting to keep that brand and that authority and that respect and that public safety and protection on our movie sets. Why else would we be fighting so hard if we didn't respect or if we didn't feel that that brand had, at this point, an adequate level of respect? I just find that this whole thing is so ridiculous that one man, and when you ask him why this is happening, and the answer is because he can, and because he feels it's right, and therefore hundreds of thousands of voices in the city of Los Angeles are being ignored, it's just wrong.
Thank you. The last speaker is Robert Mandel.
Hi, my name is Robert Mandel. I'll speak quickly on the chance that you won't extend me time. I have several little observations I wanted to share with you. First, my perspective is unique. I'm a location manager since 1982, and I've been an assistant director in the Directors Guild, which also represents location professionals on the East Coast. It's odd that on the West Coast it's always been under two different unions, and it's provided a disconnect between the planning of movie shoots, where the location logistics are provided by people in one union, and the production management and the organization of the shooting order, the set, the number of shots per day is organized by another union. And while we do come together on the set, it's been unfortunately a bit of a dumbed down and capricious industry that has managed to get work done quickly and at the last minute, partly on location because of this kind of unique ability to have officers show up at the last minute so when the earlier speaker talked about that last minute ability to generate officers, it's almost a product of this disconnect, if you will, in a shorthand. A college chum of mine is now a politician in Iowa, and he's invited me to Iowa to consult about the new incentives that they've just changed to keep up with the other states in this country that are offering incentives. And as part of my effort to go and consult with him, I've done some investigation. In 2005, Louisiana's fiscal auditor did a report saying, quite honestly, these things don't pay off for us. But if politically you guys want to do incentives, it's fine. It's just the taxable tax credits are not adding up to a net gain. The multiplier effect actually is a bit of an illusion. Massachusetts just issued another fairly damning report saying, we're giving away millions and millions of dollars. This you might have seen in the press. It's really starting to become a percolation among these stressed out states that this incentive program isn't necessarily creating the jobs long term, producing increased tax revenue long term. I'm not saying that this too shall pass, but you have an infrastructure here of studios and skilled crews and service providers that through benign neglect you may accidentally let wither away during this downturn. The last thing I just want to say is that Burbank, just to give you one example, when I call as a commercial operator at the last minute and want 9 officers for a commercial that I'm hastily organizing, because all commercials are hastily organized, and their department is only able to supply me with 4 officers because their department is of modest size, and they call a coordinator and say, can you bring 5 LAPD retirees to work in conjunction with our officers serving in a different uniform? And while this infuriates the Los Angeles Police Department, who would like to have their uniform proudly on the streets of Los Angeles only, this multi-jurisdictional neighborhood of filming locations that we all operate in, that slack in the joints is extraordinarily valuable. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to make that commercial in Burbank, and if that agency gets too much resistance, they're just not going to come to Southern California to do these kinds of things. Slack in the joints and creative dissonance is part of what makes the movie industry, and it's hard to impress that on people that have a bureaucratic, uniform, standardized training, and unfortunately you've got one with amazing amounts of political capital, and his willingness to spend it, seems to be very, very strong. So,
thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for the extra time. Thank you all, and well, council members, what are your thoughts on this?
Okay. Well, first of all, if you look at the motion, I think the motion Mr. Labange introduced asked for a hearing, the legal issues, and also recommendations, since there's no recommendations from the police department other than we're going to do what we want to do. And the recommendations from everybody else is, no, you shouldn't do that. I don't think this committee can act on anything today, but I think what I would recommend is we note and file Mr. Labange's motion, and that we immediately go to drafting. I'll work with his office, and those others have indicated. So a motion to reinstate the program legally through the municipal code. I really don't want to go that route, and I will call Chief Bratton today and suggest to him that's not the route we should go. We should find a way to resolve this issue. But barring that we need to bring the motion into the council, and this motion doesn't accomplish that. So I move note and file.
I'll second that.
A question, Mr. Chair. The city attorney, can they come up, this is about process? Just left?
See if we can find them.
There it is. Yes, on this issue. Discount this one scenario. Let's assume we have to go in a direction, big assumption. Hoping Councilmember Smith's conversations with the chief works out to a much more efficient approach to this solution. Let's assume that we have to go down the path. We want to change the language in the municipal code. What hearing processes or what time frames are necessary that allows us to inject the type of language that reaches a policy statement that the council agrees upon? If we go through that change, how long does that take to alter the language so that it reflects the policy of the council?
Well, I believe that first you would have to have a hearing before council to establish that direction as a policy. Our office would then work to develop the language for the proposed ordinance that would then come back to council. However, having said all that, if there is a change in the language, you also need to be aware of, as Chief McDonald mentioned, that any change in the municipal code could result in a violation of the penal code, section 538D, which prohibits the wearing of the uniform, and there's some other language that goes along with that. I just point that out because it has not really been discussed, but certainly this committee can go forward and have council discuss that and request that a change in the language of that section be made. I don't know the time frame because some of that will depend on when council takes this up and
right, but ideally, let's say there's a scheduling, there's dates set up by law. I mean, I understand there's hearing procedures that we have to follow. Are they 30 days, 60 day, 90 day? Assuming that we can move on a parallel track. So if you mentioned the penal code,
right?
Isn't the penal code also a policy issue?
Well, the penal code would supersede any municipal code section.
Okay.
It's state law.
And the penal code prevents non-police officers from wearing the uniform?
Right. What Penal Code Section 538D provides is that any person other than one who by law is given the authority of a peace officer who willfully wears, exhibits, or uses the authorized uniform, insignia, emblem, device, label, certificate, card, or writing of a peace officer with the intent of fraudulently impersonating a peace officer or fraudulently inducing the belief that he or she is a peace officer is guilty of a misdemeanor. So,
but critical to that is the very first sentence, anyone other than by law.
Who's given the authority of a peace officer.
Okay, so does not the municipal code, is not that a law?
No, who is given the authority of a peace officer.
But we can do, if we choose, because we have done it for 50 years, by operation of the municipal code, a law, given that authority to them.
Right, the municipal code does not give them the authority of a peace officer. It gives them the authority to direct traffic and control crowds under the vehicle code.
But for the purpose, later in the sentence, it goes on, for the purpose of defrauding. So there's no defrauding action if the council chooses by municipal code to give that authority, and we're not giving them arrest authorities and powers of peace officer status under 830 of the penal code. We're giving them the right to use the uniform.
Right, but their statement is conclusory, and that I don't know if that statement is correct. That merely authorizing them under the municipal code gives them that authority that would supersede the penal code.
Okay. And I think that's what okay.
Right.
You're not saying definitely that's not.
No, what I'm saying is your statement is conclusory based on what I hear and the fact that you have said that the uniform gives them the effect of the law. I think that would be inducing people to believe that they're peace officers.
So the penal code says no, but the municipal code gives the chief of police the authority to grant them to wear that uniform for the purpose of traffic control.
Right, and even that's questionable whether or not that would be permitted.
I guess the essence of my question really is about timing. We understand that there are some folks who are anticipating a decision, there's going to be a consequence to an action within a couple of months, which means that if the council is going to be addressing this, we really have 2 to 3 months to come to some kind of understanding and statement within changing the municipal code.
Right, at least several months, I would think. Yes.
We're talking about 90 days?
Right.
This process?
I would think that process would take at least 90 days.
Their deadline's September 12th?
I'm not sure what deadline.
Okay, thank you.
Let me just ask a question. So I'm clear, what Mr. Smith was asking, the fact that we for decades have given them the authority to wear a uniform and be involved in traffic is all we're really talking about. We're not saying we want to overrule the penal code and say you're now a peace officer.
Right, but
So does that steer us clear from the penal code section?
No, because the penal code says a person who by law is not, or who by law is given the authority of a peace officer. We don't have the authority.
What has that section been doing for the last several decades? How have we complied with that section that's in?
I'm not sure how we've complied. That's something that we will have to look at. That's question.
It's only been,
well,
since the mid-'80s.
Yeah.
Right.
Mr. Park, you're right on that. You didn't finish the sentence. Okay? The sentence says, authorized uniform and emblem device such as or writing police officer with the intent fraudulently impersonating a police officer. These people are not fraudulently impersonating a police officer.
Or fraudulently inducing the belief that they're a peace officer.
But it's not fraudulent when it's directed by the city of Los Angeles and has been for 25 years
right,
or more.
And the answer to that is, I don't know if if the city has the authority to do that, which would otherwise be against the penal code. That's what I'm saying. And that's why it was not here for part of that discussion.
So we don't have the authority to say this is not a fraudulent activity.
Right, merely giving them the authority to direct traffic and crowd control, I'm not sure if that is consistent with giving them a broader authority as stated in the penal code, and whether or not that would be prohibited.
But when you look at the LAPD manual and they actually advise them if there is a law enforcement issue, they have to do what? Call the police.
I'm not familiar with the
I mean, the thing is,
manual.
they're being told when they go into that job, they're not public safety, they're not police officers.
And it is
But
not-
if there's a law enforcement issue, they're asked to call the police.
Right,
They're
and it
asked
is not the authority issue per se. It is the fact that this section prohibits the wearing of the uniform, and there's other sections that deal with wearing the badge that looks like peace officer badge and wearing other indicia of police officers. It's not the authority, because I think the authority, as I understand it from the discussion, is clear as to what their role is. It's whether or not they're allowed to look like policemen while doing that under the penal code.
Public perception, with the public's...
Right, because it is an inducement. I mean, you believe the reason, as Councilman Smith said, reason why people listen to you is because they believe you're a peace officer, and that would be an inducement.
And so it would be the public that would be defrauded by the city council directing them to act in this manner.
I would have to look at that, Councilman. Right.
Let me just ask one. Mr. Smith asked that we receive and file this. I was wondering if we have the ability to bring this back with all those legal questions while we're looking at the alternatives, because I think these legal issues have to be resolved, and whether we have the authority to do what we want to do, so we don't get to a point and say, you can't go there. And so I think if the things that we've asked the city attorney, I think that issue about the pensions is important, because it just gave an impression that if you're on a IOD pension, you can't go out and do this stuff, when we know historically, people have worked universal type of jobs in the sense of being IOD, and particularly when you don't have a review factor. So I'm just wondering if we should get all this stuff back and a review.
I think that would also be an appropriate motion, and if we're asking legal questions to be considered, I would also ask about the uniform, how different the uniform has to be considered not in violation, whether you have to go in the direction that the chief has been talking about, where you might be appropriately looking somewhat like a waiter in a European restaurant rather than someone directing traffic, or whether having a slightly different badge and a patch that says retired police film unit would qualify as a different uniform, even though it otherwise looked exactly the same. Where that line would be drawn would also be a good legal question. So if we could have that added to the previous motion to receive and file.
Instead of receive and file, would you just want to hold it for one more week in committee and ask for a report back next week?
That way we get it done.
I don't believe we'd be ready in a week. I know I wouldn't be ready in a week.
Well, we got a time problem.
I understand.
We ask for it in a week. If you find that you're not able to, we'll give you a maximum of 2 weeks, but let us know.
Too kind.
Thank you. Let us know by Thursday whether you think you're on track for
Let's
this
have
week.
it back next week, and we'll go ahead and draft the motion and have it ready to put in case we don't have the answers.
And I think also we need June, who's sitting back there, to give us some idea, how does all this work if there's not a funded unit?
Oops.
I mean, so I think that's another issue that needs to be answered.
Okay, what about extending the deadline for the officers working this detail to extend a deadline since we don't have
We don't have
the
the authority.
information we need?
We don't
Well,
have
what
that
about a
authority.
request? I know we can't demand it. What about a request to the chief of police that he extend that deadline while we do our research on this matter? Otherwise, they're going to go out and buy new uniforms at expense to themselves. For what purpose if we end up modifying it?
Certainly would make sense to add that to the motion if there's
We'd
no
ask the chief of
objection.
police while we're still reviewing to extend his deadline to a later date.
With all due respect, that September 20th deadline could cause a shutdown in filming, so we really do need to address that, because these gentlemen are not going to buy this new uniform and repaint their motorcycles as the chief wants.
Well, we didn't talk about repainting the motorcycle.
Oh, yes, he has.
No, I just said we didn't talk about it here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
What colors did it have to be?
Currently, they're allowed to run the black and white motorcycle. The chief has dictated that they are either black or white now, which means most of the officers would have to repaint their motorcycles as well.
Okay, that matter wasn't ever discussed.
Okay, so
Thank you.
it is a significant cost to these fellows.
Okay.
Well, so this motion would be,
To postpone or extend out for 60 days, 90 days, the implementation of that modification.
so we would make that request to the chief as part of this motion.
Yes.
And based on the timetable, let's just ask the city attorney's office to be back in a week. Do the best you can, and I would also encourage you to request that the city attorney himself have some involvement in this as well. So if that could be the motion.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded.
Just to
Without
clarify,
objection.
committee members, you're keeping the motion in committee for 1 week.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Without objection, that will be ordered.
Item 12. Item 12, Police Department, Fire Department to present a verbal report regarding a modified deployment plan.
Mel Show, please be quiet.
We could ask everyone to leave as quietly as possible so we can continue business. Thank you.
Yeah, we're going to bring in some officers in here to control this.
Please, if we could have your presentation.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, council members, Emil Mack, operations admin for the fire department, and with me today.
Leonard Thompson, Operations Deputy for Emergencies.
And what we are here to present to you is the fire department's modified coverage plan. As we all know, during this fiscal year, the fire department has been asked to basically share the city's deficit, and we are charged with a 10% reduction in our budget. Before you today, we have the 10% reduction in the sworn resources for the fire department. Obviously, this is not something that the fire department wants to do, nor is it anything that any of us wants to do, because it is going to affect public safety, it is going to affect firefighter safety, and we all understand that. As we move forward with the modified reduction plan, it will achieve the 10% reduction, and how it will work is basically a citywide system of rotating company closures. Why the option was selected is that, one, the uncertainty of what is actually going to be the total amount that the fire department is going to be responsible for in budget reductions. Second is the ability to adapt. And as we all know, we have brush season coming up, and that the modified closure plan does allow us the flexibility to respond to changing conditions in the city at a fairly rapid pace. The other item is the ability to implement. There are always labor relations issues in anything that we may do, but this has the fewest, but not to say they're not significant. So we do want to say that. We also look at firefighter safety. That's obviously to us very important for our members, and as you're looking for the welfare of the firefighters of this city. And the final piece is coverage. Are we providing the best coverage that we can based upon the reductions that we have to do? As far as what does it look like, we have an initial phase which will be approximately $39 million. And for your information, the closures will begin on August 6th, and as of today, we are already beginning implementing the preparation necessary for the rotating closures for August 6th. In summary, what the closures will look like is, on a daily basis, there will be 15 fire companies closed throughout the city on a daily basis. There will also be 9 rescue ambulances that will also be closed. We have 1 battalion command team that will be closed per day, and as part of the fiscal budget that we were given this year, we also will proceed with the closure of 3 EMS district offices, and those are permanent closures because, as we all know, though we weren't provided funding for those in this fiscal year, so that will all be part of the closure plan. In addition to the closures of resources, we will also address our recruit training. We will be closing 2 of our 3 training academies, so instead of training 150 people this year, we will train 50. Why we decided to continue with 1 training academy class is, as you are well aware, we don't want to get too far behind in our attrition rate. And on average, we have 120 members of our department attrit out. This is statistical averaging, and it's pretty solid because we base it upon looking at our known people that will retire this upcoming year. Also, we anticipate, if we are able to hire another recruit training class in 10-11, by the time that class starts, the class won't actually put people in the field until latter 2010. So we'll basically have an 18-month period of no recruit classes, and that's why we stress that we need to have the 1 class to at least take some of the attrition number and minimize it a little bit. Further, we have a $13 million difference. As you can see, we have an overall $52 million sworn budget deficit we need to make up. We've offered a plan that comes up with 39. We also have that $13 million difference. To us, we appreciate the support that is occurring right now to help find alternate resources or sources of funding to fill that gap, because we have to say that if we have to come up with another $13 million, the effects will be catastrophic. It's bad enough what we're having to do with the 39 million, but going to 52 million will be catastrophic. It will mean that what we tried to do with the $39 million plan is keep all fire stations open. With the $52 million plan, and if we have to come up with the other 13 million, we are very likely looking at fire station closures. So that's just something that we want to stress. The impact, everyone wants to know what the impact is. Obviously, the immediate is that there's going to be increased response times. When you close a resource in a station, that there is going to be an increased response time because that resource is no longer there. That means another resource is coming from further away, and usually instead of a 5-minute response time, you're talking about a 10-minute response time. And I'll give you what you all were aware of. Brain dies in 4 to 6 minutes, and for a fire, at 10 minutes, it reaches the point at which it flashes over. And we try to have our resources on scene within 5 minutes, both for the EMS aspect as well as for the fire, so that we can catch it before it reaches that stage at which it totally involves the area and then starts moving out. Additional, we'll have a decreased number of resources for pre-deployment. With the brush season upcoming, you have seen and also have felt how what a great advantage this is, that we pre-deploy resources in the high hazard areas of the city. It puts us in immediate large number of resources. We recently saw that at the Sepulveda fire, where we had a pre-deployed strike team, which is 5 engines and a battalion chief down on Sepulveda at Fire Station 88. So when the Sepulveda incident went down, we immediately had a strike team right there. So I know I'm not telling anything new to the members that have council districts in the Valley and the east side of Los Angeles, that these pre-deployments are vital to our ability to get a quick response to brush fires. In addition, we will also have an impact upon our ability to respond to mutual aid requests. Fortunately for the city, neither the county or any of the other local fire agencies are going through resource closures, so that's a benefit to us, but quite the contrary on the reverse. We will have less ability to respond to requests that come from outside our area or from other agencies. But again, noting that if something is imminent upon the city and it's still in another agency, we will respond to that. But again, another noted impact. We will also have an impact on our mandatory company training, because on a daily basis, we have resources going to our training facility, both for operational training, leadership training, human relations training, emergency medical service, EMT, paramedics. So many of our trainings occur on duty, and it requires our companies to travel to training sites, both decentralized as well as centralized, to acquire the necessary training to maintain their proficiency. As we go through this, as you would expect us to do, we will be monitoring daily and looking at what the potential impacts are occurring, and obviously quickly advise you if we see any trends or any things that are developing, because obviously if things are having a negative impact, we want you to be aware of that, and still understanding that we do have both a service level as well as a physical crisis that we're in, but we do want to keep you informed. Some of the principles of the plan is that we want to keep every fire station open. We also wanted to ensure that we were safeguarding the safety of our firefighters. We wanted to minimize the impact on EMS and fire service. We wanted to maintain at least one fire company in every fire station district. We wanted to maintain one paramedic resource in every fire station district, and we also wanted to keep all 89 of our paramedic ambulances open. So those were the guiding principles by which we developed our plan. And as said earlier, it's not something that we want to do nor anyone wants to do, but in response to our overall fiscal crisis, we understand our responsibility. Any questions?
I have at least one. Has anyone actually done any analysis of what the real impacts would be, especially in terms of paramedic and emergency services, in terms of loss of life? anyone looked at it and said, okay, 100 more people, 50 more people, 300 more people are likely to die because we don't have enough and a quick enough response to services? And if that analysis has been done, what's the result?
I don't think we've done that analysis, Councilman, but just be aware that no paramedic services are, none of our paramedics are being affected by this at this time.
Well,
we may have to move into that if we go to the additional 13 million.
Well, if you're talking about the response time going from 5 to 10 minutes in some circumstances, I would say that's a pretty substantial effect. So how can you say you're not affected at the same time?
Oh, and it goes back to, and it kind of, Chief Berry already put it forth, there'd be speculation to try to determine now what the potential loss would be in numbers, but we will say that the impact, as you said earlier, response time and number of available resources will have an effect upon our service, and we will be monitoring and recording what you had just talked about, but at this time we couldn't give you what we think could occur as far as number of life loss. But there will definitely be a service impact. Yes, there will.
How did we get to this point? Did the council this was all happened before I got here. Did the council authorize these cuts knowing that this kind of an impact and potential loss of life could be taking place?
It was at the direction through the budget process that all departments, including the fire department, had to develop a 10% budget reduction plan. And within the fire department, a group was assembled to look at all available options, given the time constraints, given labor issues, given our current deployment, to develop what we thought would be the most viable plan that we could implement quickly to start realizing the savings that we needed to.
And I don't know, maybe this would be as much of a question for my colleagues. Did anyone ever compare the different departments to say, well, if we cut 12% for tree trimming and cut 8% instead of 10% for fire, that we might want to prioritize these cuts?
Let me just give you an overview. Basically, what happened in the budget is that most departments were cut three ways. One, they were given only somewhere between 93 to 95% of their salary, so they were given a cut on right off the bat. They were then positions that were vacant were cut, so they got two cuts. And then the mayor's budget was based on what was termed shared responsibility, where every department, in addition to those first two cuts, salary savings and loss of positions, they were then asked to come up with a 10% rollback. And that rollback could have been in a variety of ways in their budget, through negotiation, through a variety of a menu of opportunities, and that's where the whole issue of early retirements came in, and it just has flowed from there. And as we went through the budget process, we made it clear from the council's standpoint that although we endorsed the mayor's proposal of the 10% cut, that at some point in time, and we thought it would be done much earlier than what we are today, but at some point in time, that if all of these menu of opportunities were explored and they did not find a 10% cut, then the only alternative that the council would have is deal with the cuts either through furloughs or layoffs. We did not have any tools other than that. And we also made it clear that if you get too far into the fiscal year, the cuts will be even more severe because you have less time to make the cuts. And so that's the process that we've gone through, but as part of the 09-10 budget, it was basically termed shared responsibility, where every department was asked to go through an exercise, and if things did not turn around, if there were not concessions made, if there were not issues that were forthcoming, there wasn't a windfall of money that we didn't know about, that these cuts would be implemented. And since the budget, what we have found is that there's been minimal in the sense of funds coming forth from negotiations or any other source. And then we have, as of last week, somewhere in the neighborhood of over a couple $100 million, where the state now has said money you had relied on top of the $360 million that the city had already declared as a liability in its own budget. Now we have the added state revenue that's being taken and how the city's going to deal with that. So that's kind of a thumbnail of what took us several weeks to get to.
Well, I have to ask this of my colleagues. Are other folks on this body not concerned with what we're hearing? And is there some logical direction to go to address it?
I have a couple quick questions. I want to bring clarity to this. When you say, Chief, that you're cutting companies, that's a single engine off of a task force or a light force, not closing a station.
That's correct. We did not want to leave any district in the city uncovered, so Councilman is exactly correct.
It's a critical point because some people have had press conferences saying we're closing stations. We're not closing stations. We're reducing force.
That's correct.
So let me ask you then, how does that increase response time? It reduces the response, but it doesn't change the response time because there will still be at least one or two engines to that in the same amount of time. They're just short an engine.
What you get is a trickle effect. And so in a station where you have the two resources as you just described, Councilman, that if the first one goes out on a response, when the second heart attack or the second incident occurs in that district, now you're waiting probably at least 10 minutes for the
But they already were because that station house goes as a unit. They never break it up.
You actually
on the call.
Yeah, you actually have two resources. Let's say you have an EMS call. So of your light force and your engine, one of those resources will go along with probably an ambulance. So that incident is being taken care of. In our high activity areas, as you well know, the second call comes in, and since that second fire company is now closed down, the fire company for the initial dispatch of that second incident is now coming from much further away. So it adds that 10 minutes that we were talking about a little bit earlier. And the same thing with...
How many times a year does it happen that the first ends are gone and that other engine would be necessary and's not there?
It happens quite often, and it happens so often that we coined the term collisions. So we actually ran statistical data, and we haven't done it recently, but in years past, we ran statistical data looking at how often collisions occurred within fire stations, and we actually had districts that had a high number of collisions, especially, as you can imagine, in our busier districts, there are a high number of collisions.
But I would assume we're not looking at those stations as the one we're going to pull out those resources then.
Unfortunately, Councilman, to do exactly what you had said, we're having only affecting the two stations with two resources, and to shut down 15 a day, we have to rotate that, and I know this is going to get a little bit complex as far as numbers. That 15 rotation closure will rotate, and it will affect every one of our task forces throughout the city, and so that's why it's really a citywide effect. And out of our 45 task forces that are identified to be part of this, and we only have 47. We took out the one at the airport, and we also took out the one in the downtown hazmat.
Okay.
Those 45 task forces are spread obviously citywide, and all of them will be affected on one of 3 days.
And the question asked, and I know this is to the detriment of my district.
Yes.
Why would you do it that way? Why would you not take certain stations that have the high call load and say we are not going to put them in that rotation? Because you've got 45, you're taking a third of them out every day. Why not concentrate half of that into those districts that don't have heavy call loads? I've got task force stations in my district that don't get the call load of Station 4 or others. So why not, and again, it's to the detriment of my district, but why not put the impact in those kind of stations that don't have a call load?
Because what we're trying to do, and you alluded to it, we're trying to provide equal coverage throughout the city. And I understand.
So it was a policy choice you made.
Right. It's a policy choice.
Okay.
And those companies on the periphery, like your district, are typically the ones that have the slowest responses. Northeast Valley, all along Mulholland, east side of Los Angeles, down in the harbor, and some over on the west side of L.A. So we would be, affecting those districts, and there wouldn't be enough slow companies to meet the type of deficit we have, unfortunately. So just by sheer numbers, we wouldn't have enough slow companies to meet the budget shortfall we have.
Okay, the
But
last question.
we have thought of that.
Yeah, I appreciate those responses, those good responses. And the last question I had is on the ambulances. When you talked about the RH, those are the 800 series you're eliminating?
Yes,
So
we will be closing 3, what we call V-staff rescues that are hired overtime each day. So those 3 will close, and they were 12-hour ambulances. And then we will rotate the closure of 6 EMT ambulances, as you know, which are not the paramedic level, but the basic life support level ambulances.
So other than the equipment that rolls with that 800 series ambulance, you still have the paramedics on the engine companies?
That's correct.
So we're not reducing immediate life-saving ability, and they have defibrillators and all those things, at least on the engines.
And that was one of the principles, is to keep a paramedic resource in every district.
Very good. Thank you.
Councilmember Zine?
Chief, I think that the perception, when I see the headline, fire stations closing, it's really not accurate. We're not closing stations. What we're going to be doing is reducing the number of personnel, which I don't agree with. But each station has a fire truck, has a paramedic, has firefighters working those 12-hour shifts, 24-hour shifts, whatever they're working. They're still going to be open, 105, 104, 88, et cetera. So in essence, you're scaling down the crews, but you're still going to have 4 folks on an engine?
Correct. We will be scaling back, as Councilman Smith said, 1 of the 2 companies at a fire station. We do insist upon maintaining our staffing levels on our companies as they are today for firefighter safety as well as operational effectiveness, so that's something that we're very insistent upon. But to repeat back to you, it will be 1 company of 2 in a fire station.
Okay, so firefighters are still on a regular ABC schedule.
Correct.
Are we going to reduce the amount of overtime because of the full staffing situation, or is it going to be that someone who works a shift, they're not going to be working basically furlough, because we're not doing furloughs?
Right.
So exactly, are we not going to be? I'm trying to figure out the component.
The money savings comes from, as you said, the constant staffing savings of overtime.
So the constant staffing won't continue, but we'll still have 4 people on a rig.
Right.
We just won't have a secondary rig there.
The secondary rig will be shut down, 15 of them per day.
And then that's going to take out of the constant staffing formula, the overtime. So we're not going to do furloughs on any of the fire personnel.
That's correct.
And we have that much constant staffing need?
Well, give you kind of a quick math problem here is, on a daily basis, we have approximately 2,000 CTO vacancies, sick, vacation, whatever. 200. Okay.
200.
I hope I said 200.
2,000.
Yeah, okay. No, we're not that, so 200 per day.
That's 200 personnel.
Right. With the rotating closures that we're talking about per day, that will be 87 members that will then be put into those, or put into those 200 vacancies. So that's where the constant staffing overtime savings comes from. The resources that we are closing for the day, taking those personnel and then moving them to fill 87 of those 200 daily vacancies.
Okay, so there'll still be constant staffing.
Correct.
And there'll still be the opportunity for those folks to work, but we're just not going to have as many working as we normally would.
Correct.
So a fire truck that rolls out would be a fire truck with 4 firefighter, engineer, et cetera, and a paramedic unit, but in other words, there'll be some continued operation in each station.
Correct.
Because the perception is you're going to shut, when you talk about closing, that you're going to be closing stations.
No, it'll just be closing of resources and
reducing of resources, I think will be more.
The number of resources at that station, but we will be maintaining our staffing levels.
And the other aspect of the money that you're still going to be $13 million short, where's that going to come from?
We're hoping it comes from somewhere beside the department, because as mentioned earlier, trying to close 8 additional fire companies very well may turn into stations closing.
Which would be a full closure where the doors are shut and there's no one there.
Right.
Which we don't want to do.
Right, because right now with the modified coverage plan, we are, as you had alluded to earlier, we are taking that second resource and closing it at those stations.
Now, the other question I have regarding, and Mr. Smith discussed this, mountain fire districts, where we have Mount Washington, Mulholland Drive, Granada Hills, where we have this area right now without a lot of water or any water. It reminds me of what the police department did with the photo red light, is they put one in each council district, not taking consideration where the major injury and fatal crashes are. Then they realign that. Have you thought about staffing those facilities where you have a higher incidence of the season that we're in right now, where we need those units instead of that response? Because obviously a 5-minute or 10-minute delay when you have a brush fire in Sepulveda Pass or some other location could mean the difference between homes being saved and homes being taken away.
Right. And we are going to make every effort, as you talked about, when we have our high hazard periods of times, to pre-deploy resources to the best of our ability with the resources that we have available. So yes, we do want to stay one step ahead of any significant weather or brush hazard.
And you mentioned mutual aid. I think we offer more mutual aid to the neighboring jurisdictions than they offer to us.
We will, at this point right now, we made a decision the other day that normally we would allow up to 5 strike teams out of the city, which is 5 engines each, so 25 engines. Because of this plan, we are scaling that back to 2 until we can actually further evaluate that, and that is a direct result of this reduction in resources.
Okay. And was this reviewed with the union for their concurrence or their objection?
The union is in ongoing discussions regarding the plan, and also our employee relations officer is meeting with both labors to address their practical consequences of this issue, and the plan has been shared with both.
So August 6th this begins, and the bottom line to the consumers, the residents, the taxpayers, the business folks, et cetera, is this being done because of cost overruns, where you have a $52 million gap, but they're not going to see, at this stage, the closure of any of the facilities, including air operations and the boat down at the port.
Right. No facility or fire station closures.
Or air operations.
Or air operations. Air operations is not impacted.
Okay. Thank you.
And I'll have other council members ask their questions, and then we'll ask Mr. McCosker from UFLAC to come up and give his perspective as well.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. You alluded to this in terms of how it's going to impact different parts of the city, this policy that's being recommended. When you look at the level and intensity of incidents when it comes to shootings, and there's obviously certain parts of the city that has that at a much higher level than others. How did you weigh that? I mean, in terms of, are we going to now be in a position where it's going to take longer for the paramedics and personnel to get to these incidents? Can you just explain what that's going to mean in a very basic way?
Kind of tell you what our deployment is now. Our deployment is already based upon geographic distance, and what that means is response time, trying to be able to arrive on scene within 5 minutes, and call load. So areas of the city that, as you were referring to, have high call loads, they already have a high number of resources in those areas, and typically the stations are located closer together. So just by just by our present deployment,
the density, right?
Right. High activity areas, which, as you just said, translates into high density areas, already have a higher concentration of resources to obviously meet that workload and that high activity workload. So yes, we did look at the distribution of the company closures and how it affects every part of the city. The thing is that we have to use all 45 of our task force houses that have the 2 companies in it to implement this plan. So there isn't no ability not to bring in some of those stations. We have to use all 45 task forces, and they're located all around the city. But getting back to your question, those areas that have high activity already have the highest level of resource numbers and usually stations in closer proximity than other areas of the city, less busy or dense areas.
No, I understand what we have, because I also know we have the highest poverty.
Right.
And the toughest living conditions, quality of life has deteriorated.
Yeah.
And on I can go through the whole list. I don't need to dwell on that, but does that mean the folks in these areas are going to have a longer waiting period? They might not get attended to? Or are you saying what they have there is enough?
No one will have enough when we implement this plan. And yes, there will be increased response times throughout the city. Yes, there will be that impact, because we can't implement this type of resource closure without having that impact.
So it behooves us to get our communities organized, knowing that if there is an area of high violence, et cetera, that you just might not get there.
Right, and it's simply based upon number of resources that we have to close to meet this budget reduction number.
Will current captains be able to work with our senior lead officers so that those communities that do suffer higher levels of shootings and violent actions of that type because of the poverty and everything else that exists, I mean, do we have to start going there now?
We would definitely encourage, both from our side, that our people reach out to the local community, as well as what you're saying, the local community reach out to their, local chief officers and stations, letting them know what the impact is, because one thing, as we had talked about earlier, we want to know and monitor what is occurring with this plan, because we, as, especially yourselves as city policymakers, don't want to be in the dark that there's this impact that's occurring and you're not aware of it, so that you can then make potentially different decisions based upon the feedback that we're getting from the community and this department.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Parks? Ask a couple of questions. Let me just say, and it's just, I guess, a misnomer, or how you read it, is that when you say increased response time, my first reaction was you're going to get there faster, as opposed to what you're, I think, saying is that you're going to get there slower because it's going to increase your travel time. And so I think it basically, when you say increased response time, I think most people would think you're getting there faster as opposed to slower.
Yes, you're correct.
Okay. And then the other issue is that what would also be helpful, because I don't know one task force from another, but the issue is what would be helpful when you say what you're going to reduce is also give people some impression of what remains. Okay. So if there are 13 of these that will be reduced today, people should know citywide there's 300 left. Or those would give you a perspective. Are these reductions 1%, 2%, 3% of the daily workload? It would give us a much better, because otherwise you will have somebody that will go out and declare that the world's coming to an end, and we'll all be scurrying around trying to say, no, that's not quite what it is. So it would be helpful to keep it in perspective, to say, when we say reduce the size of this type of unit or task force or truck, you should be aware that there's 50 others of those trucks deployed during the same 12-hour work schedule. So that would be very helpful to kind of get the message out. The one area that I didn't quite understand, when you gave the scenario of the 56 million versus the 39 million, I got the impression that the $39 million plan was, although not where you want to go, but it was at least livable.
That is what we can implement with the time constraints and with it being short of catastrophic. And I'll...
That's what I need to find out. What happens with 13 million that makes it from livable to catastrophic?
We no longer are able to keep stations potentially open. Because
so you no longer have the rotation. Reducing rotation is not the answer anymore.
The $39 million keeps at least one resource in every fire resource in every fire station open.
You basically run out of the dual stations, the two company stations, all those are eliminated, so you go to companies that are single stations and you eliminate those.
Because what is it, 100-plus fire stations?
106.
106. So there's, when you talk about the 45 task forces, they're the dual companies. So you still have another 70 that have single, or something like that.
Yeah, basically what the breakdown is, we have 47 task forces, two of which we're keeping out of this program because one's at the airport and one's our hazmat. We have 53 single engine houses, and then we have two what we call light force stations, and Councilman Smith would be familiar with 28s, and then also in the Studio City, 78s.
So those 50 some odd are untouched by this $39 million plan.
Right, because they're single resource houses.
So that generally the person that's living in the community, their local fire station, not knowing one from the other, the larger percentage of them are untouched.
If you want to say over half, yes.
Okay, all right. Yeah. And then the...
Councilmember?
Al?
I don't want to interrupt you, but I know we're going to lose quorum in a couple of minutes. I wonder if we could have Mr. McOsker come up and give us a couple-minute presentation and continue after that.
Okay.
Thank you, council members. I appreciate it. Pat McOsker, United Firefighters of Los Angeles City. I really appreciate the honesty of the gentleman to my right. They've answered your questions very honestly. That being said, I want to clear up a few things, some that came from you all, and a couple things I think require more explanation. First thing is, I never said, I get the impression Greg Smith believes that I've said that stations are going to be closed. We're going to have company closures, fire companies and ambulances. It is exactly what these gentlemen have described yet. They will result in delayed responses, and the result of delayed responses will be deaths. We've been through it before. Unfortunately, in the 1990s, we had this situation happen, and some people passed away because of it. The other thing I want to explain to you is that the reason that these 800 ambulances and EMS district captains exist is to free up paramedic ambulances for the calls we go on. In other words, we get calls every day that we can handle with a basic life support ambulance, but if one isn't available, we are going to send a resource. In this case, because the only ones left will be paramedic ambulances, they will now be out on basic life support, not available for heart attacks. You should know that when paramedics arrive within a minute of a cardiac arrest, they save 90% of victims. When they arrive within 12 minutes, or when it takes them 12 minutes, they save 1 in 10,000. And that line of saves, that ratio is a straight line going down from 1 minute to 12 minutes. So people are going to die because paramedic ambulances are tied up. That's something that you should know. You should understand that part of the plan. Listen, I've said it before, and I will say it again to you in the last 30 seconds I have, and I hope I can answer questions and provide more input to you. But we firefighters understand how severe this economic crisis is. We want to help the city get through this crisis. We are absolutely willing to do our share. We're only asking that our share be equal and balanced with the rest of the city's workers. But please don't allow these company closures and ambulance closures to go forward. If you do, people are going to get killed. I think it's now rightfully before you. Up till now, it's been the mayor's decision, telling the fire chief to move forward on these closures, but I hope it's in your hands now, and I look forward to working with you on it. Thank you.
And I'd ask you, if you had the opportunity, what would your recommendations be in this situation?
I think that you ought to apply the same rationale to our negotiations and get involved with us the same way that you did with the civilian workforce, because we are absolutely ready, willing, and able to agree to a fair contract that does our part of shared sacrifice along the same lines as what the civilians have just done with you.
And so that's not happening in your case, so what is happening?
Well, I hope to be in front of you all in closed session tomorrow. I understand Council Member Hahn introduced a motion on Friday asking that I be invited into the closed session. I'll discuss with you in great detail then negotiations. This is a public meeting. I probably should refrain from being too specific, but just know this. We've only been made one offer at the table by the city's negotiators, and the offer that they made was so severe, would take so much pay out of firefighters' pockets, that it was nowhere near the deal that has been offered to civilian workers and they've now agreed to. It was something that was designed so that we couldn't agree to it, and quite frankly, we're hearing and we see that the city's strategy up to this point, the city's negotiators anyway, strategy is to move toward impasse with firefighters and then impose something on us. We're looking for a fair deal. We're looking to work, with all of you. And
is there any way through the negotiation process that what what results could help us avoid what we're talking about here today?
Absolutely. With the proposals that we've made, give you the shared sacrifice that are being asked of the fire department. And in doing so, we've applied the same logic, the same rationale that you all used with civilian workers in their shared sacrifice piece.
So, Mr. Chair, I just have a question. So you can come up with $52 million in savings for the fire department?
The proposals that we've made do more than $52 million worth of shared sacrifice.
We'll hear about that tomorrow. Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Councilmember Parks, do you want to continue your?
Let me just ask two more questions. On the issue when we talk about rotation, what's the general number of firefighters that are on duty per 12-hour shift?
Per 12-hour shift?
I mean, that's
For the 24-hour shifts.
the 24-hour shift.
About 1,100.
1,100.
Pardon?
About 1,100.
1,100. And so that's another thing I think would be important when we talk about that we're reducing the number. It's normally 1,100. Is it now 1,050? Is it 1,000? I mean, that would be helpful for all of us to keep it in perspective, because it's just saying this is missing doesn't give us what's there. And then my final question is, and this is something of looking at your chief's proposal of the 38 or 39 versus the 56, is it harder for you to gear up or gear down? And the reason I ask that is that what I'm concerned about is that if you take off July or August the 6th or 16th or 6th, and you take off on a $39 million plan, and you get to mid-year and find out that's not enough, that then your remaining part of the fiscal year is amplified far greater to reach the remaining amount because you have a shorter time to deal with it. So is it easier, not best, but is it easier to start off with your 59 and gear back if the situation occurs, than start off at 39 and gear up?
One of the things that we're looking at is that will be a tremendous, and I emphasize tremendous, impact on the city as far as emergency service. What we're looking at is that every pay period, we're going to look at what savings we're getting.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to evaluate every pay period exactly what we're saving and what we're not. We're hoping that some kind of compromise is forthcoming some way. However, yes, it's easier to ramp up initially. However, it has a tremendous impact on the services.
Yeah, I understand the impact, but I'm just trying to get a sense of, because we're going to hear this in budget in a few minutes, is that if you get down the line, then that ramping up becomes more severe, where today, starting August 6th, you might need to find 80 or 90 people. Come January, you may need to find 150. And that's the dilemma of letting the fiscal year slip away. And again, if you're at mid-year, January, and you find things have gotten better, you can reduce back from 100 to 50 easier. You go from 100 to 150. And I think that's the dilemma that we're in trying to judge all this, because it's just not our budget. It's also now that we're trying to fine-tune what the state has done. And again, that's very recent. And when and there's no assurance on some of the funds that they've taken that we could even bond against. I mean, so these are things that we have to put in the cycle. So I just wanted to find out from your timing, again, it's easier, not better, but it's easier to gear up early and gear back down than the reverse.
Correct.
If I understand it.
That's correct.
Okay.
Well, if there's no other questions, I would suggest a motion to request the department to come back with an assessment of what the impacts would be on each individual council district to our next meeting. Okay, it's moved and seconded. If there's no objections, so ordered. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now thank you for your presentations. Now we have public comment. Speakers will be Phyllis Dougherty, followed by Patricia Hurst. Actually, I think I mispronounced her name.
Good morning, or good afternoon, Phyllis Storty. I also have to apologize for being so casual. It was the last thing I intended to do was appear here today. But on my way down here, I spoke with Commissioner Quincy, who just resigned from the Animal Services Commission, and I hope you saw the article in the paper. He did make some allegations that there were some illegalities that concerned him. I believe that was more of a literal comment. Actually, the thing is that there are some undocumented irregularities, and these commissioners do not get the right documentation. They do not get what they ask for, and they make decisions based upon information that they later find out was incomplete or not accurate. This has been an ongoing problem in the department, and it's been exacerbated by the general managers that we've had who are not particularly interested in the truth being exactly the truth. I think that is going to change in the future, but in the meantime, we've lost an extremely valuable commissioner, someone with over 30 years Los Angeles County Animal Services in a department where no one in the upper administration has any local animal control experience. No one. When you call to get an answer to a question, no one knows the answer. They don't know the distance in the city. They don't know how it's set up and how it works internally. And that's, again, an ongoing issue. I wanted to see if there's anything that anyone can do. Commissioner Quincy is actually in Herb Wesson's district. I thought he was in Councilman Park's district. But he also represents a very important area of Los Angeles where we do not have a voice on the commission. We have the Valley, the West Side, Highland Park. We have no one from the south area of Los Angeles or the harbor. So if there's anything that can be done to get us to Commissioner Quincy to stay on the board, he would be willing to consider that. And I'm hoping that someone can make an overture in some way to the mayor to discuss it with him and ask him to stay.
Thank you. Mrs. Patricia Hurst, be followed by Dr. Clyde Williams.
Cars, rush hour, because of the non-coordination between the fire department, DOT, and the police department. An incident that started at 2:30.
Ms. Hurst, on the mic, please.
Oh, sorry.
Thanks.
An incident that started at 2:30 in the morning on Friday, and I was there for an hour and a half until the streets actually started moving. And the lack of coordination between those departments was unbelievable. If there was one fire or one major incident in that 0.6 of 1 mile, this city would be held liable for not getting that street moving. And that has absolutely, there's no excuse for it. People were driving in reverse up Mountain Gate Drive because the traffic was being sent up there because there was no place for them to go, and they were looking for a secondary access road. Third incident in 7 months, not acceptable. And I would like, you have my letter that was handed out to you that also was faxed to John White, unfortunately late notice because it happened on a weekend. So the bottom line is I would like this committee to ask the Department of Transportation, the Fire Department, and the Police Department to respond somehow to this incident and how they can work together. It was a joke to have two people from parking enforcement tell me, lady, we've got better things to do than to issue tickets when they're standing by the side of the road having a conversation on their cell phones and not directing traffic. It was unbelievable. And that's what those pictures show. They were just standing by their vehicles doing nothing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Clyde Williams, to be followed by Joan Taylor.
Dr. Clyde Williams, 4115 Barrett Road, El Sereno. Regarding fire department funding, you just had a presentation. I would suggest that you consider requesting the Board of Fire Commissioners to make the brush clearance and brush firefighting self-supporting. That is, make the fees, make the penalties worthwhile so that people will get the job done before the fires come. We have a situation that you need money.
What happens if there's a major brush fire while you're on reduced staff? That means somebody somewhere is going to die. Fortunately, the fire department saved me once from potential explosion. So I greatly support any sort of effort on the part of the fire department and the fire commissioners to prevent brush fires by properly instituting the brush clearance requirements, which would eliminate most, if not all, brush fires affecting structures or any public areas. So it seems kind of strange on one side not to enforce the rules that are available. Oh, how about liability? Who's liable for brush fire damages if somebody has not done their brush clearance? Maybe you could also require all sources of fire in the brush to actually have to pay for the firefighting. And that would be a significant inducement for people to properly clear the brush before the fire season starts. Money is there. Thank you.
Thank you. Joan Taylor, and you're our last speaker.
Chair, members of the Public Safety Committee, I'm Joan Taylor, a resident in your district, Mr. Koretz, and I have had less safety from a criminal abuse since you came in than I had before. It's known as the second worst electronic abuse in LAPD records for many years, and I left each one of you a letter on your desk this morning asking for specific arrests of people most involved in this crime currently in the same building, and also to ask that you see that I have the same safety you do. Perhaps you would feel more comfortable, Mr. Koretz, since you are new to the council, if you ask Greg Smith, who is not here, to either accept or refuse the assignment, to give him specific responsibility to see to my safety. But I've got to have complete safety from this crime, and you are not providing it. I'm sorry to bring a complaint to the committee, but I hope you will see that I have the same safety from this abuse. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other items? If not, we are adjourned.